Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Minato fought the hidden stone from the inside? Part 2. Game time. Iwao was a godsend. Not because I liked him, particularly, but because I now had a child to measure my growth against. Turns out, I had left the kid in the dust, and given him an inferiority complex in the process. I regretted that, but at least I knew I could outthink and outperform a child native to this world, one whose daddy could afford the best tutors Iwagakure had to offer. That might seem a little unfair, coming from a reincarnated 34-year-old, but I had no idea what to expect of the children here. Yes, there were kids like Iwao, who had a moderate degree of talent, but there was also Uchiha Itachi, Hitaki Kakashi and others who could probably outclass me in every way. Advanced mental development or not. So I was glad to have confirmation. And the kid wasn't the worst company, all things considered. Despite his status, he wasn't arrogant or spoiled, and he knew when to shut up. He also knew how to read, with impressive proficiency for his age. Something that I knew I'd need to learn, although that understanding didn't stop me from procrastinating as much as I was humanly able. Language in the elemental nations, or in Iwagakure at least, was weird. Everybody spoke both English and Japanese, and though English, called common, was used most prevalently, there were times people were expected to speak in Japanese, called traditional. I had no idea as to the origin for this system, and Akane Obasan didn't either. But while common was the preferred language for speaking, traditional was the preferred language for writing, and I couldn't even begin to decipher what each symbol meant on my own. It didn't help that there were essentially 3 different alphabets: hiragana, katakana and kanji. From my old life, I knew that hiragana was the written language most native to Japan, while katakana was a phonetic alphabet that was basically a go-between for other languages and Japanese. Words from other languages that didn't possess hiragana were written in katakana. Meanwhile, kanji were Chinese symbols that represented entire words, adapted to Japanese. In the elemental nations, hiragana was mainly used informally, like in menus at quick-service restaurants, fiction novels or in messages on bulletin boards. Katakana were interspersed with hiragana, as they were the only way to write many words. However, they weren't yoinked from another language, supposedly. Instead, they were simply created to represent new developments, as if someone had the bright idea at one point to make an entirely new language instead of adding to one of the 2 existing ones. I won't complain only because it was by far the easiest for me, a native English speaker, to learn. Meanwhile, kanji were more formal. Names and titles were typically written in kanji, and I've never seen a scroll bearing hiragana or katakana. Kanji were the hardest for me to get a hang of, as there were so many elements hidden within each one of them. Akane Obasan offered me lessons, but they weren't very helpful. She wasn't a skilled teacher, and she had forgotten completely what it was like to learn the language. Iwao-kun, who remembered like it was yesterday, since it practically was, knew what was helpful, what was not, and shared shortcuts he had discovered himself or been taught by his tutors. All it took was some heavy-handed manipulation. He was so desperate to prove he was better than me at something, anything, he agreed to the proposition almost immediately. It helped that he was, at heart, a gentle boy, and wasn't emotionally cognizant enough to understand the jealousy that surged through his veins. I felt bad for using the kid, so I made sure to pay him back for his services with interest. Not that he noticed. I taught him games that would improve his flexibility, which I knew had to be nurtured at an early age, and instilled habits that would improve his overall conditioning. Still, even with his guidance, it took an embarrassingly long amount of time to learn how to read and write. Perhaps even longer than it took actual babies. I slowly and surely made progress, however, because I refused to be illiterate. To test myself on kanji one day, I pulled one of the dusty scrolls off Akane Obasan's shelves. None of them were labeled whatsoever, so I had no clue what their subjects would be. What I found was the last thing I could have possibly expected. Step-by-step diagrams, each illustrating the creation process of a mother seal. Akane Obasan, I croaked, the hoarseness in my voice having little to do with my injury. What is this? Oh, these are some old scrolls my Atsuchi-kun left here, she said breezily, waving her hand as if it was no concern. I can't make heads or tails of them. Do you like the pretty pictures, Kaseki-chan? My brain was still short-circuiting. Yeah, pretty pictures, I murmured. Wasn't sealing knowledge incredibly rare? And wasn't Iwagakure kinda known for being especially shit at it? How was there a sealing library in this random woman's home? And who the was Hamamoto Atsuchi? At least this kinda explained why she had so many goddamn calligraphy brushes lying around. Are there any with words, Obasan? I asked. I haven't looked through them all myself, she admitted. I don't really understand them. I'm not supposed to show them to anyone, but I won't tell Atsuchi-kun if you don't. Just make sure to return the scroll to their exact same spot, alright? I'm pretty sure they're organized in a special way. If Akane Obasan had looked through a couple, there likely weren't privacy or self-destruction seals on them. Sloppy, but convenient for me, so I set to work. It took me hours just to find something that wasn't a diagram, and I was disappointed but not surprised to find that I couldn't understand a lick of it. The kanji were unfamiliar to me, and many likely had no English translation. If I wanted to even begin to crack this mystery, I would need some kind of dictionary. I activated Puppy Dog Eyes no Jutsu and turned to Akane Obasan. Every time Kazuhiro returned home from a mission, he found a different child waiting for him. That's what it felt like, anyway. Kaseki was growing at an unfathomable rate, and he had missed all of her landmarks. When he returned from a 2-month-long bodyguard mission in the Land of Grass, and found his god sister speaking in complete sentences, he nearly had a heart attack. She wasn't his daughter or anything, so he wasn't too disappointed at this, only feeling a distant sort of pride and happiness. At first. But then he remembered that Hisashi didn't even have the option to be present for his daughter's first steps or to finally hear her say the word, "to-chan." That was when he got sad. He had missed his parents when they passed, but Kaseki had never even known her own. Which was why, even though his heart ached every step of the way, he took Kaseki by the hand and led her through the streets of Iwagakure to the Monument of the Fallen. A giant rendition of the Tsuchikage's conical hat was carved into its base of the surmount, the tallest mountain that sat directly behind the Tsuchikage's palace. Underneath the kite-shaped space that the embossed kanji for Earth resided, was a line of text. Upon the strongest base, the highest peak will rise, a soft voice spoke from his side, and Kazuhiro nearly flinched. She could read. That's right, he said awkwardly, before pausing. He really didn't want to do this. He really didn't want to be here with his god sister. But it needed to be him. He owed it to Hisashi. The names, she said, reaching out towards the stone before hesitating, fingertips an inch away. They're our fallen comrades, aren't they? This time, Kazuhiro did flinch. How did she guess that? And our fallen comrades? Yes, they are, he said finally. Engraved into the space around the kite, though not as deeply as the earth kanji itself, were countless names. So many, in fact, that they had run out of space in the hat itself, and many had artfully spilled over onto the surrounding mountainside. He decided to parrot what his academy sensei had told his class when they visited all those years ago. Do you notice anything about the names here? He asked. Kaseki regarded the monument for a moment before answering. They're all written in different handwriting. He nodded in agreement. That's because they were all engraved by different people. When an Iwa shinobi falls in combat, one of their comrades will inscribe their name into the monument with Doden manipulation. And you see how there is a dash between each name. That's to represent our bond. Past, present and future, all of our shinobi are connected. Then, he broke script. I've written 11 names on this monument. Kaseki shot him a look that he couldn't begin to decipher. I'm sorry for your losses, she said softly. Were my parents among them? He exhaled heavily. Yes. Do you want to talk about them? Do you want, not can you? The word choice made his heart ache. But maybe he was overthinking it. Hisashi always said he was in his head too much. You don't have to, if it hurts too much, she said hastily. Kazuhiro wasn't sure if the words made him feel relieved, disturbed or embarrassed. Some shinobi he was, if a child could see through him so easily. Your Okawa-san wasn't in my life for very long, he admitted. But she was kind, from what I saw. She was a jonin though, so she must have had an edge to her. Your Otou-san, On the other hand, he was serious. Compassionate to those he considered a part of his family, more reserved with comrades. Deadly to his enemies. He taught me how to be a man, how to fight, how to work as a team. I loved my own father, but he didn't know how to do most of those things himself, so Hisashi stepped in when he felt like he had to. And I could never thank him enough for that. Do you have a picture? She asked him. Cameras were a relatively recent development, so he did not. However, I think they began taking photographs for Iwagakure's Shinobi registrar before he was retired. I can ask, to see if they ever got theirs done. Also, Hisashi made his way into several bingo books. I can show them to you. Kaseki nodded in thanks, and wrapped her arms around his leg in an almost hug. He wrapped his free hand around her shoulder and pulled her close. Anyo, could you also teach me what my two-san taught you? She asked hesitantly. When you're a bit older. Certainly. He just had to make sure he was still around when the time came. Kazuhiro, for the longest time, had simply been going through the motions. After his parents' deaths and the disaster that precluded his promotion to Chunin, his only goal on missions was to survive and do his best to make sure his enemies didn't. There was nothing to protect aside from Iwa's ambiguous interests as a whole, and there was no one depending on him. Hisashi would have been sad at his passing, but he would have been alright without him. Even when Kazuhiro adopted Kaseki, it hadn't really sunk in. Not until this very moment. He finally had a reason to grow stronger. So he would, by whatever means necessary, he would live until Hisashi's torch had been passed on to his daughter. The girl backed up 2 paces from him, and bowed her head solemnly. Arigato, Ni-san. Well into my 2nd year of new life, I had gained total, I think, though some of the smallest tributaries may have eluded me, awareness within my dominant arm. I imagined that the left was simply mirrored, though I'd refrained from spoiling the surprise by checking. I wanted to gradually expand my mapped regions rather than skip around to other parts of my body, because I was worried I'd forget what I had previously learned in the meantime. Therefore, if I wanted to get to my other arm, I had to pass through my torso, which I was substantially more wary of messing with. Of course, that hadn't stopped me during the initial voyages I had taken before deciding to map out a small segment of my body at a time. I had, a bit stupidly, circumnavigated great stretches of my entire body without sending myself into cardiac arrest, and I could control my submarines a lot more skillfully now than I could have back then. Each ripple of chakra conformed to the size and shape of its surroundings, which was both a good and bad thing. Good because I never had to worry about sharp edges puncturing my canals, and bad because, as I forced smaller spaces to accommodate them, the submarines tended to speed up. A lot. It was similar to the effect of exit diameter on water pressure. Like how, if you change a setting on a hose that makes its opening smaller, the water will shoot out with more force. If I moved my submarine from a wider canal to a smaller tributary, it would go a lot faster. This was dangerous, because my internal awareness and reflexes weren't great, and if I let a fast submarine slip out of my control, its momentum would carry it forward no matter what. And my tributaries were rarely straight. I've pierced my canals more times than I could count, and it was never that big a deal. The internal damage it caused was reminiscent of an extremely sharp jab of a needle, just, inside me. However, those were all in my arm. There were a handful of extremely important things in my chest. If I pierced my stomach, intestines, appendix, liver or kidneys, the toxic sludge they housed could seep into places that they really shouldn't. If I pierced my lungs, I could drown in my own blood. And if I pricked my heart, I might just straight up die. My solution to the pressure problem was a technique I created, which I called splitting. When I decided to venture down a tributary, I split my submarine into 2 parts, one that was the perfect size to fit the tributary, and another that would continue down the original canal, fizzling out without my conscious while pushing it onwards. The trick was judging what sizes to split my submarine into. As much as I liked the submarine metaphor, I didn't actually have a sonar or any means of navigation beyond memory and feel. So, I had no way of judging how wide a tributary would be before I entered it, which meant I had to rely solely on memory to decide how small to make each split. All the more reason to take things slow, I guess. Until I Once again, got bored. Then all bets were off. I did have the sense to only attempt it while Kazuhiro was home from a mission. He could get me to a hospital a lot faster than Akane Obasan. Cautiously, I began exploring this new frontier. I inched forward, deciding to first delve into the main canals thoroughly before venturing down any tributaries. It was there that I ran into a massive, underground spring. It was similar in shape to one of my tenketsu, only a lot bigger and more powerful. It pulsed with chakra, and unlike the other tenketsu, I couldn't flex it like a muscle. Ever since that trip to the monument to the fallen, I felt a lot closer to Kazuhiro. I made him uncomfortable, I could tell, but he did an admirable job at moving past that. Also, the only things he knew about kids and their development were what he had learned from those pamphlets. He'd had no exposure to anyone my age since he was that age himself, which meant he had no preconceived notion of what typical kid behavior was. He rarely batted an eye at unusual requests regarding personal interests, especially in regards to literature. All that was to explain how I received a series of ninja biology texts for my second birthday, actual books rather than scrolls, thankfully. And I didn't have to look very far to discover the object of my search. In the prefix of the introductory text was a map of the chakra circulatory system, depicting a human's channels, but not any of the tributaries, and all the tenketsu, 8 of which were rather special. I facepalmed as soon as I made the discovery. I already knew that the 8 gates were a thing, I just forgot about them. Well, more accurately, I just thought they were a niche little piece of biology that didn't have much significance aside from the boosts they gave when they were opened. Reading more about the gates, which weren't touched on until the second volume, I discovered that my assumption was very, very wrong. The 8 gates are wells of chakra sequestered off from the rest of the circulatory system, I read. As chakra stimulates the organs surrounding them, each of the gates stores regulate vital functions. Therefore, the amount of chakra within each of them, which grows through continued use and conditioning just like one's general chakra reserves, reflects the performance of said organ. If these stores were compromised in some way, the body would experience a vital loss of function. Well, that would explain the tearing muscles, broken bones and red skin. Might Guy should have never been put in charge of children. Additionally, the gates themselves and the chakra within them each fulfills certain functions. Kaiman, the gate of opening, is located in the brain's left hemisphere, and stimulates the processes that traditionally take place within it, such as logical thinking, language processing, mathematical proficiency along with speed of calculation, and sequential problem solving. As such, it becomes a source of spiritual yin energy, which is a fundamental building block of chakra. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their kaiman might report headaches, decreased analytical prowess and concentrative ability, and the loosening of subconscious limitations that would have otherwise protected the body from itself. Human, the gate of healing, is located in the brain's right hemisphere and also stimulates the processes that traditionally take place within it, such as spatial awareness, vivid imagination, pattern recognition, proficiency in the arts and intuition. Like the kaiman, the cumin is a source of yin energy. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their cumin might also report headaches, along with a reduced ability or even an inability to judge one's level of exhaustion, hyperactivity, and inability to tie effects to causes and unnatural irritability. Simon, the gate of life, is located in front of the spinal cord, between the esophagus and the T1 thoracic vertebra, below the base of the brain stem. Yin energy from both the kaiman and the cumin coalesces inside the simon, and is divided into 2 equal portions. The first remains in the simon, combining with physical yang energy to become holistic chakra, while the other is sent downward along the right hemisphere of the Inochi no Yubiwa, see section 30b, to meet the same fate in the kaiman. Because of this, the simon is considered to be one of 2 major chakra springs within the human body. However, it fulfills one unique function beyond that. The simon receives information from pain receptors and other nerves, and distributes healing yang-skewed chakra to the injury. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their simon might report extreme fatigue, shortness of breath, shooting pain through the upper back and non-localized hemorrhaging. Shoman, the gate of pain is located below the simon, between the lungs and the T8 thoracic vertebra. The third source of yin energy. This gate holds a person's chakra identity, and between any number of subjects, no two are the same. Evidence of both elemental affinities and most chakra bloodlines, if applicable, can be found in this gate, which nurtures each of them. Note: this gate is not the root of bloodlines or elemental affinities, it simply regulates their effectiveness. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their shomen might feel physiological pain, especially in their spine and hands, and bloodline wielders might suffer even more drastic side effects from their jutsu. Treat multi-affinity bloodline wielders with extreme caution if there is a suspected dysfunction with shomen, for your own safety as well as theirs. Tomen, the gate of limit, is located in the abdomen, between the liver and the solar plexus, and acts as an intermodal chakra point in the upper chest, regulating passive chakra enhancement to both of a person's arms. It receives unconscious signals from the brain, and distributes chakra to each arm accordingly, enhancing both muscle and bone. Shinobi with a sufficient level of skill can augment these further, but a healthy and well-developed tomen increases the capacity with which said shinobi is able to do so. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their tomen might report muscle soreness, a feeling of bloatedness, tightness, or artificial heat in their arms, and bone fatigue that may cause injury after training or combat. Kaimen, the gate of view, rests just above the stomach. Yang energy produced as a byproduct of the digestive process coalesces with yang energy produced from exertion, which is brought into the kaimen through countless inward-flowing quinary and scenery chakra coils that siphon energy from surrounding cell groups all over the body. From there, the yang energy is divided into two equal portions. The first remains in the kaimen, combining with spiritual yin energy to become holistic chakra, while the other is sent upward along the left hemisphere of the Inochi no Yubiwa, see section 30b, to meet the same fate in the Simon. Because of this, the kaimen is considered to be one of two major chakra springs within the human body. Just as the stomach signals to the brain when it's in need of sustenance, so too does the kaimen dictate when the body needs to produce more chakra. Due to their close proximity, chakra exhaustion often manifests as an extreme hunger, and consuming food plays a role in overcoming chakra exhaustion as yang energy is partially created as a byproduct of the digestive process. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their kaimen may experience stomach aches, an overactive appetite, strange cravings, especially of meat, or chronic bouts of mild to intense chakra exhaustion. Kyomen, the gate of wonder, is located amidst the intestines. It is similar in function to the tomen, although regulates a person's passive chakra enhancement to their legs instead of arms. Thusly, patients that experience a dysfunction in their kyomen might also experience muscle soreness, a feeling of bloatedness, tightness, an artificial burning sensation in their legs, and bone fatigue that may cause injury after training or combat. Long-lasting sensations indistinguishable from the urge to urinate have also been reported. Shimon, the gate of death, is within the heart itself. It acts as the greatest depository of chakra within the human body, and its sole task is to maintain the heart's effectiveness. The chakra inside will not be surrendered until the person's death, no matter the circumstances. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their shimon will die. I stared at the words, reading and rereading them as I tried not to start giggling like a lunatic. Aside from the 8th gate of death, really scary that an issue with that gate immediately killed you. By the way, these were all mother stats. I grabbed a pencil. Yeah, Iwagakure had those after all. Kinda thought they hadn't been invented yet since Akane Obasan didn't have a single one, and wrote a word next to each entry. Kaimen opening equals logic. Human healing equals creativity. Simon life equals yin production and physical recovery. Shomen pain equals chakra affinity. Tomen limit equals strength. Kaimen view equals yang production and chakra region. Kyomen wonder equals speed. Kinda. Not really. But there was something there that sent my little nerd brain buzzing, some compulsive need as a shonen enjoyer to devise a system of power scaling. Let's pretend this stupid fantasy in my head had merit. If these were stats, then what was the metric? Chakra. If so, was there a standardization for measuring chakra, like some sort of calorie? Like, with a single unit being the exact amount of chakra to power the kawarimi or something? This required further thinking, and a lot more research. If only I could find a person smart enough to answer all of my questions. For now though, I would explore the gate of limit, and hopefully not rupture anything important in the attempt. And, freaking finally, I can get to the good stuff. First, please forgive me if I bungle the explanation of Japanese writing. I think I did okay, but I'm not a speaker and can't be 100% sure. If I made a mistake, please let me know, both now and in the future. I want to be respectful of the language and the people who speak it. The wannabe I use as a page break is katakana for the word wannabe, if anyone was curious. I hope. This chapter was a lot, and I pray I don't lose anyone with it. Now, you can maybe see where I'm going with the wannabe gamer part of this AN from the future, referring to the original name for this FIC. You'll rarely hear me say I'm proud of anything I write, but I am with my future plans for this FIC, and with this power system. Though I will warn you, the more mystical aspects of the gamer, i.e. boosting stats with stat points, inventory, quests, rewards, etc., are a long way off. But we will get there. She just needs to learn Fuinjutsu first. I haven't seen anything like it in the fandom before, and I hope you all enjoy it. Extreme lengths. I was addicted, and the ocean was my drug. In my first life, I was born in Tampa, Florida, and the same day I left the hospital, I was taken to the beach. Every day since, I had been taken or voluntarily returned to lounge, swim, surf or boat, unless there was a hurricane or equally sufficient reason not to. Hell, I'd do my homework at the beach. Salt water ran through my veins. Then I left for the Naval Academy in Maryland, and even though there wasn't a traditional sand beach, I still spent all my limited free time in or around the ocean. I hadn't been away from it for any significant length until my reincarnation. And it was slowly driving me mad. I felt like SpongeBob in episode 1. It would be a bit strange to simply come out and ask to be taken swimming. I had never so much as seen a substantial body of water, and suddenly developing a fixation didn't make sense at all. So, I tried to devise a way for Kazuhiro to bring me to a body of water first, after which I could better justify an obsession. There were no oceans anywhere nearby. The polar ocean was over a week's travel north and was, by all accounts, intolerable to be around, much less inside of. But, at this point, any body of water would do. I thought that Iowa must have some kind of lake or pool, but if there was one, I had no idea where it was. But then it hit me. Water walking was a basic skill for all shinobi, and even though Iwagakur's ninja didn't fight near water often, there was no way that command would tolerate such a gaping hole in their skill sets. Nay, Ni-san, I asked one day, is it true shinobi can walk on water? Iwao said his Otou-san told him they could. Do you know how to do it? Yes, Kasaiki-chan, Kazuhiro answered genially. I learned in the academy, thankfully. There are many bodies of water in grass, rain, and rivers. Which was where he had been deployed during the war. Iwa's academy must have been a hell of a lot more thorough than Konoha's. If I recall, Naruto hadn't even learned the skill until he was about to take the Chunin exams. Although, there currently might have been a greater emphasis placed on early education, what with the war that had only just recently ended. How did you do it? I asked eagerly. Kazuhiro, to his credit, had realized he didn't have to dumb down answers for me on account of my age. I was nearing 3 years old, and we had spoken a fair bit about chakra. Unfortunately, he seemed to be almost as clueless as I was in regards to chakra theory. He explained water walking, corroborating what I already knew from the show. Finally, the coup de grace. Can you show me? Kazuhiro was 19, and I rarely showed interest in anything he could do. He should have been chomping at the bit to show off. It's not all that exciting, he said demurely, like he was a shy schoolgirl. Please, I uncharacteristically begged, and he sighed. I could fill up the bathtub, he mused, and I cringed internally. I hadn't thought of that. No, that won't be as cool, I claimed. Don't we have a lake or something in the village you can stand on? No, not really, he said. Not aside from Lake Magada, which is where I learned. Jackpot. Let's go there, then. I said, excitedly. I'm sorry, Kasaiki-chan, it's not possible, he said firmly. Lake Magada is underground, deep beneath the mountains. People aren't allowed in there, it's only ever used for shinobi training. You'll be able to see it when you reach the academy, but it's too dangerous for you now. You might be hit by a stray weapon, or jutsu. Is it really that busy? I asked, feeling my smile dim. Well, not exactly, he hedged. But civilians aren't allowed there anyway. Just be patient, Kasaiki-chan. Wow, no one had ever accused me of not being patient before. I spent weeks at a time sitting at the bottom of the ocean, waiting for enemy action without knowing if it would actually ever come. You didn't get to my position without patience, but Kazuhiro was right. For some reason I found myself lacking in said trait at the moment. Certainly when my chakra practice was concerned. Was my physical age impacting my mental state more than I considered? The thought was alarming, but I, perhaps willfully, allowed myself to explain away the observation. Chakra practice was incredibly exciting, surely that was a satisfactory reason, right? I couldn't afford to second-guess my mental state. Not now. As for my current impulses, my love of water was the one tie I allowed myself to my past life. The people, the places, those were all gone. They had to be. I wanted them to be. But in this strange, harsh new world, was a little bit of familiarity too much to ask for. I hatched a devious plan, using Iwao as my pawn. After a bit more nagging, I learned from Kazuhiro that academy students learned water walking in their 5th year at the academy. There were 6 years in total, specifically during the 2nd semester. Since it was September, they were approaching that now. So for several months, including on my own birthday, I stalked the academy students with little Iwao by my side, under the guise of playing ninja. Conveniently, there was a park right outside of the academy. It wasn't exactly public, as it was used by the students, but if we stayed on the outskirts and out of everybody's way, nobody bothered to make us leave. Iwao, of course, wasn't privy to my true objectives, but he grew used to me randomly excusing myself if I saw large groups of 5th year students. I had memorized most of the roster, leave together during academy hours. Your stealth ability has risen by 1. Psych. I wish, but although a small part of me still hadn't given up hope, there was nothing to suggest I had any latent gamer abilities. Instead, I had to stalk them the old-fashioned way, by hiding behind buildings and pretending to shop, looking for a lost piece of jewelry or doing whatever else I could think of. Finally, my efforts bore fruit. I followed an entire class through the streets and to a cave dug into a mountain to the left of the surmount, which the monument to the fallen had been carved onto. It was clearly man-made, and perfectly proportioned stairs led down into the underground. I didn't go in just yet, of course. I couldn't hide from the academy students or sensei in such a cramped space, even without taking into account the echo my footsteps would make. But I did return a couple days later, after sneaking away from Iwao early into our play date. I figured I'd have a couple hours before Akane Obasan got worried and discovered my absence. I had hoped the tunnel wasn't too winding, as I had no way to navigate it. Luck seemed to be on my side, however, because the tunnel actually had signs. I just had to supply the light, something I managed with a torch fashioned from a large stick, some baby clothes that no longer fit me, and cooking oil. I carried another in my free hand, unlit, and I had a flint and steel in my pocket just to be safe. Plus, I noted the turns I took on a piece of paper, digging the point of my pencil into the page deep enough that I could feel the L or R I wrote just in case my torches weren't sufficient. I wasn't taking any chances. Though the tunnels were wide and as non-threatening as they could possibly be, minus the darkness, the underground still freaked me the out. Ever since I heard about those miners in Chile, I've avoided caves or tunnels like the plague. It spoke volumes to my swimming withdrawal that I was willing to brave this at all. But then again, wasn't I supposed to be a kunoichi in training? An Iwa kunoichi? What self-respecting rock ninja would be afraid of a goddamn tunnel? For sake. Taking a deep breath, I decided to view this as exposure therapy. I found solace in the fact that, one day, a cave-in would be about as threatening to me as the waves I once surfed on. That was to say, a little threatening, but not so much that they should be avoided altogether. I knew better than anyone else that the element I was most comfortable with could still spell my demise, if I wasn't careful. After about 20 minutes of search, I found my quarry. Rather, nearly fell into my quarry. There was solid rock and then immediately water at the same surface level. Geez, No railing or anything. Still, I couldn't stop a wide grin from stretching across my face. There was a brazier along the wall, next to the tunnel I entered from. It was fueled and ready for ignition, so I extended my torch, taking a reflexive step back as heat scalded me with a greater intensity than I had anticipated. The light from the fire illuminated most of the lake, which was a lot wider than I imagined. I could scarcely understand how the mountain hadn't collapsed upon it. Without any wind, the lake's surface was flat, glassy and undisturbed. Unnatural. With no effort, I could see my reflection, something I typically avoided because I had a very clear picture of what I looked like, and the face that stared back at me was assuredly not it. My face was supposed to be heart-shaped, not broad and thuggish. My hair was supposed to be blonde, bleached even lighter by the constant sun, not mahogany. The reflection that stared back at me had no dimples, no freckles, and was unblemished aside from tiny scars and 2 conspicuous pores. I didn't linger on it for long. Though I couldn't tell from down here, daylight was burning, so I quickly stripped off my outer layer. Underneath my normal clothes, I wore the closest thing I could find to a swimsuit, a loose white and red tunic with cinched arm and leg openings. It was thin enough, almost like cheesecloth, that it wouldn't drag or weigh me down much, and it wouldn't absorb or retain a lot of water either. Not enough to bleed through my outer layer, at least, which was purposefully dark enough to hide any wet spots. Testing the water with my toe, I found it to be, surprisingly enough, not freezing. Sure, it was quite brisk, but I was expecting far worse given my surroundings. With a sigh of pleasure, I sank in fully, my body quickly growing accustomed to the chill. Unable to help myself, I began to giggle uncontrollably, which soon transformed into laughter of pure, and only a little bit deranged, joy. I dove into the depths, pushing this body as fast as it could handle. In the water, I felt unstoppable. I swam laps, first at breakneck pace and then slowly, lazily. I floated on my back for what could have been half an hour. My new body wasn't strong in the same ways as my last body was. I could blame a great deal of that on age, but some of that also came from my lack of exposure to water. Swimming was an aerobic exercise superior and more comprehensive than almost any other. Though I tried my best to replicate the effect on land, most exercises only used select parts of the body, while ignoring others completely. As a result, the lesser used muscle groups stayed weak, which could bite me in the ass. Now that I had a water source to train in, hopefully that deficiency would right itself. Then, the best day of my new life was interrupted. I heard voices from the tunnel behind me, and I froze like a deer in the headlights, craning my ears to make out what they were saying. After the unintelligible muttering gave way to something more lucid, I heard a younger, feminine voice. "Sensei, is there someone else here? Maybe someone just left the light burning," another boy suggested. "No, there's definitely someone here," came the voice of a more mature woman. "Shit, I kinda thought no one would use this pool. The war was over, so I assumed there would be less of an emphasis placed on learning to fight on terrains most commonly found in foreign countries. What should I do? Should I hide? Probably not. The odds of me successfully evading a Jonin, I assume this is a sensei and her team, were non-existent. Better just face the music head on, and hope they don't throw me in jail." "Hello," I chirped happily as they rounded the corner. The genin, all missing brown combat vests, seemed taken aback by my presence. Though I didn't spare them much attention. "Mommy. Sorry. Mommy." Their Jonin sensei was hot. Not hot in a straight way either, she had short hair, giant biceps and holy shit thighs. Her outfit, the standard Iwagakure uniform, wasn't even flattering and I could barely tear my eyes away. But though I could appreciate the sight, I could feel my body lacking the equipment to appreciate the sight. It was strange, not to mention a little alarming. The kunoichi also seemed incredibly displeased by my presence. There was a heavy scowl on her face, and I immediately realized that my initial plan, which was to act childish and stupid, probably wouldn't be taken well at all. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "No nonsense. And don't say some shit about getting lost." "Sensei," one of her students interjected with a frown. "She's just a kid." "No, you're right," I said, to everyone's visible surprise. I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I wanted to be. Oh, and why would you want to be in a restricted training area? The hot sensei asked. Training, I said immediately. Strength exercises, specifically, and improving my endurance. I'm going to be a shinobi, I said belatedly, hoping to appeal to her professionalism. Why? She asked, and I blinked in surprise. Why do I want to be a shinobi? I clarified, but she shook her head. I don't give a shit about that. Why did you decide to sneak in here, just to train? Crap. I was hoping she'd take that at face value. Well, I hedged. I didn't really sneak in, no one stopped me. But I chose this place because I run a lot. But that mostly just trains your lower half. Swimming is, like, the upper body version of running. You know, 'cause you're moving yourself with your arms. It was a childish way of thinking, but hopefully, since I was a child, it would fly. It's working too, I tacked on nervously as her eyes continued to pierce through my soul. They were electric blue and cold as ice. I can tell because it's wearing out my body in ways I've never experienced before. She stared back impassively for several more moments, before tossing her head. Your training session is over. We have our own to get to. I nodded, turning to leave. But then I remembered the feeling of the water and stopped. I want to come back and train again, I said boldly, and she turned her eyes back to me. Feel free to book it when you get your own headband, she said, but I was already shaking my head. I'm going to be Iowa's top shinobi one day, I said, deadly serious. But I can't be, if I don't start now. One of the little assholes behind her giggled, but Sensei gave no tells as to what she thought of my claim. The strongest shinobi, she finally clarified. Not the strongest kunoichi. Ah, a fellow feminist. Not to profile, but who's shocked? I grinned, though there was little humor. The GOAT. Greatest of all time. Or I would die trying, and not necessarily by choice. Such was the world I now lived in. If you want my blessing to use this training ground, you'll have to prove to me you're worth it, she said dangerously. The Jonin raised her hands and performed what I recognized to be a hand seal. I didn't know them yet, but I committed its appearance to memory nonetheless. Then, she shifted to a second, and raised her palm upward. It began to glow. Ninpo. Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, she announced. Ninja art. Little light technique. Cute. It's an E-rank jutsu, which barely requires any skill at chakra manipulation to cast. Learn it. Holy shit. I was being taught a jutsu. I didn't even care that it was E-rank. Didn't know that was a thing, actually. I thought D rank like the Kawarimi and Henge were as low as the classification went. All I cared about was how I was going to be able to do ninja magic. I would love to, I said with extreme sincerity. But I'm only 3, and I was told that I would rupture my everything if I tried to mold chakra. At 3, your pathways should be resilient enough to handle this, the Jonin said. As long as you aren't an idiot and try to channel too much too quickly. Be gentle and purposeful with your chakra, and you should have no injuries. She drew herself up straighter. Return here exactly a week from now. If you can perform the jutsu for a whole 5 minutes, consecutively of course, I will allow you to exercise here while I train my team. If you fail, I will judge you as having no talent, and I will personally ensure you can never take a step into this training ground until it is time to learn water walking with your class in the academy. Do I make myself clear? This wasn't Konoha, that's for sure. But I flourished in the military, and I was more than accustomed to harsh taskmasters. And even more than that, my blood sang at the challenge. As crystal. I'll see you in a week, I said with perfect confidence, and hurried back the way I came. The sun was much too far along in the sky, and I had to get home to receive my scolding. When his little god sister asked him for a scroll on hand seals, Kazuhiro didn't think much of the request. Drilling the movements was vitally important for a shinobi in training, though many settled for simply memorizing the sequences of the jutsu they learned. He didn't have to ask to know that Kaseki wouldn't so much as entertain the prospect of taking that shortcut, however, so he agreed easily and bought her the manual. It was adorable watching her attempt to contort her fingers into the unnatural positions, and she often got frustrated. But the scary level of focus she sometimes possessed overcame her difficulty, and after spending an entire day doing nothing else but sequences, she managed a shaky grasp of all 12 basic seals. I won't accidentally perform a jutsu if I practice combinations, will I? The little girl asked, awkwardly holding up the dragon sign. No, Kazuhiro answered. The hand position is only half of what makes a hand seal. The other half is a pulse of chakra, originating from the major tenketsu in both hands. And beyond that, most jutsu also require a conscious direction of chakra, which can be aborted. For example, Kazuhiro, showing off a little, flashed through 5 hand seals, ram, boar, ox, dog, snake, and reached out towards a dining room chair with his chakra. An instant later, he and it had swapped places. That was the Kawarimi no Jutsu, he announced. When I wove the signs, it created a projectile chakra pulse, which I had to consciously fire at the chair, my object of choice. When it came in contact with the chair, it switched our positions. Aiming and firing that chakra pulse takes practice, and can be difficult to do in the middle of a fight. Kaseki had watched the demonstration with the appropriate amount of awe, but he could tell that, behind those expressive, brown eyes, her mind was working overtime. When you say major tenketsu in the hands, which of the 23 are you referring to? She asked, excitedly. Kazuhiro was caught flat-footed by the question. 23, he asked. Well, I don't know about that. Anatomy isn't my strong suit. Very little was, unfortunately. I was taught to flare my chakra through all of them, he said, his tone making the statement coming out more as a question. I know some of my classmates had difficulty flaring all of them at once. Kazuhiro had different problems, but he didn't wish to admit them to his adopted sister. Fascinating, she chirped. Thank you, Ni-san. I understand why this wasn't working now. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and, from memory, formed her hands into the nei seal. Then, she shifted it into tatsu and unclasped her hands, leveling a palm upward. It began to glow with soft light. Ya-tta, she cheered, though not enough to disrupt her jutsu. Kazuhiro stared, gobsmacked. Is that a? He trailed off, not finishing the question as the answer was obvious. I went to the hospital to ask when I could start using chakra safely, she said cheerfully. One of the nurses said I should be able to do this one now if I was careful. She showed me the hand signs. Did she tell you what constitutes using chakra safely? He asked anxiously, as the phrase was incredibly vague. Yep, she said. She said that if I felt twinges of pain, I need to use less chakra, and if I start to feel woozy I need to stop until a day after I feel better. That checked out, he supposed. But by the kami, what was with this child? The requests she made for medical texts were strange enough, but he could write that off as an extension of her extremely conspicuous and inescapable need to understand how everything around her worked. The wonder on her face when she learned something new was so adorable that he had fulfilled her wish, fully expecting her to get frustrated and lose interest 5 minutes into her attempts to decipher the incredibly dry text. But she hadn't. Kazuhiro didn't think that was normal, but he admittedly hadn't spent time around anyone her age since he himself shared it. He was an only child, and a rather dull one at that. His friends in the academy weren't much smarter than he was, but he remembered those elite few at the top of his class. Especially Sasaki-chan, who stood head and shoulders over her peers and aced every trial with ease. She probably could have understood those texts. But could she have cast a jutsu at this age? He wouldn't be too surprised. Maybe this was within the realm of expectations for someone who, unlike himself, possessed natural talent. Okay, good. Then, Kazuhiro's face broke into a soft smile as he reached over to rest a hand on her head. He could imagine her at the top of her class, the object of adoration and envy. That it was his responsibility to raise someone like that, he suddenly felt a great weight on his shoulders. You're so cool, Imouto. You'll be an amazing kunoichi someday. She grinned, looking so much like her mother at that moment. Kazuhiro wasn't sure if he had ever seen Mana without that exact expression on her face, the few times he'd interacted with her. I think you deserve a treat for learning your first jutsu, he announced. What would you like? Something new. She cheered, and Kazuhiro laughed in bemusement. What a strange child. What kid ever wanted to try something new? A day after I finally learned the Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, I discovered that simply executing the technique was the easy part of challenge. Maintaining it for 5 consecutive minutes was the hard part. Keeping focus and steadying the stream of chakra to my hand was like exhaling for an extended period of time while keeping the intensity of the airstream constant. It was easy at first, but grew exponentially more difficult as time passed. I was getting better at it, but I'm starting to suspect that it was an unreasonable goal to give an ordinary 3-year-old. Well, I did say I was going to be the best. If I wanted something easy, I shouldn't have talked so big. I practiced and practiced, neglecting all other projects in the face of my deadline. I didn't even socialize with Iwao, though I wanted to teach him my new jutsu as a thank you for his contribution to the events that allowed me to learn it eventually. Once he grew up a little more, I might take him to the hospital to actually get a medical professional's opinion on the matter, just to be safe, as he surely didn't have the level of awareness over his chakra that I possessed. But when I finally managed to sustain the jutsu past the 3.5-minute mark, I began to have other difficulties. Those being my chakra reserves. I had overestimated their size, probably due to my own ego and the suggestion from fanfics that a reincarnated person's chakra was larger because they possessed an abundance of spiritual energy. I guess I also assumed that all my internal chakra manipulation worked to increase my reserves by a lot, for some reason. Apparently, I was wrong on all accounts. My level of focus went beyond what any normal child could be expected to muster. That was the only advantage I had brought to this life that had any relevance to the exercise. Scratch what I said earlier. This task wasn't just unreasonable for a 3-year-old, it was impossible. That bitch just didn't want to share her space with me. She was in for a shock then. I was going to pass her challenge, and I was going to resort to drastic matters to do it. My plans began with a dive into my Kaiman, gate of view, which was responsible for signaling the body to create more chakra. I wasn't going to do something stupid like open the gate even if I was that much of a moron. I assumed the spandex duo were the only ones in the anime capable of doing so for a reason, but I was going to try and trick it, hopefully causing the organ to let out a false signal that would cause the body to produce more chakra even though I was already at full capacity. How am I going to do that? I have no idea. My plan was just to fiddle around in there until I found my answer. According to my medical textbook, the gate worked on an overflow system. It would take care of itself first before distributing its excess chakra to the rest of the body. So, to make sure it was topped off, I ate a lot, so much so that I had a permanent stomach ache for days. Too full to do much of anything comfortably, I meditated, molding the chakra inside of me like a potter would clay, without letting any of it escape. Now that I knew my canals, coils was the correct term apparently, but I prefer my water metaphors, had a bit of resilience, I tried to expand them, manipulating my internal chakra to inflate them almost like a balloon. But carefully. As soon as I felt the slightest trace of pain, I would move on to another segment, focused around the gate of view. My thought process was that, if I increased the size of my canals around the gate, I could trick the organ into thinking I didn't have enough chakra, which would stimulate production. The plan was stupid and, in retrospect, it was obvious it wouldn't work. Attempting to trick the system ended in failure, so next I tried to work within it. I scoured the medical texts Kazuhiro gifted me, trying to find what factors caused the gate to signal for the increased production of chakra. I found frustratingly little, but there were a couple of gems hidden within the text that was otherwise drier than Suna. The gate of view had canals leading directly to 9 tenketsu aside from the other gates. Which was cool because, unlike the gates, I could actually manipulate those. Allegedly, there was some degree of communication between these tenketsu and the gate, observed in a study I bet had been conducted in Konoha and stolen by a spy. Though the study itself was convoluted, it suggested that, to an extent, the gate used these tenketsu as a sort of antenna to gauge the body's overall chakra level. So, theoretically, if I could move the chakra out of them, the gate might think I was near the point of chakra exhaustion and increase production. Something that was a lot easier said than done. I doubted that emptying just one tenketsu would be enough. I would have to do multiple, perhaps even all 9 of them. To make matters worse, they were all spread evenly through my torso, which might as well have been an entire ocean as far as my little submarine was concerned. I devoted the rest of the day to figuring out how to do just one. I clenched a tenketsu right underneath my ribs, referred to as tenketsu 65, and tried to direct my chakra. Strangely, it didn't want to go further into my chakra network, it wanted to push through the barrier of my skin altogether. I think this was due to the orientation of the organ. It was like a valve that accepted a substance from two sources, but released it in a single, different direction. But I didn't want to release the chakra outside of my body. That would be a waste, and counterproductive if I wanted to amass chakra. My submarines were proof that I could potentially coax chakra back into my body and through the canals. Only, there was a big difference between making a simple ripple in a pool and squeegeeing all the water into another place entirely. It felt unnatural and intense. The chakra didn't want to cooperate, and if my concentration lapsed, I would lose hold of it immediately. And, of course, keeping the chakra away from the tenketsu was almost as difficult as getting it out in the first place. I persevered nonetheless, but just before I finally managed it, I was shaken out of my trance by Akane Obasan, who proclaimed that it was time for dinner. Annoyed with myself as much as I was with her, I grudgingly forced myself to eat copious amounts of the roast she served. Mindful eating was usually a technique used to control excessive eating, but I used it now to consume more, focusing on the taste rather than the discomfort in my belly. Getting this technique, which might not even produce my desired end result, down would take all of the time I had left. I would effectively be putting all of my eggs in the basket. Well, when in shonen, do as the shonens do. I waved off Akane Obasan's concern. I had barely said 3 sentences since I realized how unfair challenge was, and left for an early night. A year ago, I had upgraded to my own room, which I still hadn't gotten around to decorating. My bed was a lot bigger than it needed to be for my size, not that I complained, and there were heavy-duty blackout curtains that stifled every last ray of the morning sun. I didn't actually fall asleep. Instead, like I had the last few nights, I meditated into the wee hours of dawn, finally forcing and keeping most of my chakra away from the tenketsu. It felt uncomfortable, almost like a loss of circulation. Then, I realized my chakra, in the segment of the canal connecting Tenketsu 65 to the gate of view, was getting backed up. Hurriedly, I dropped the technique before something important could explode. Well, that's a problem. The challenge, the solution wasn't to halt the flow of chakra to and from a tenketsu, and I was an idiot for ever thinking it was. But my experience taught me a valuable skill, which was the ability to use my tenketsu to force chakra back through my canals, something I would later find most people couldn't do. It also led me to my next solution, which was to simply force my chakra through the tenketsu and into the other parts of my body more quickly, keeping the organ in a constant state of depletion. That was rather dangerous as well, but I had already developed my submarine splitting technique, which greatly cut down on the chance of catastrophic failure. And if any canals did get backed up, they would be the much less important ones located in my extremities. I took great satisfaction in that win, even though it wasn't exactly intentional. And, it wasn't even difficult. At first. But then I added more tenketsu, and then the challenge really took off. Unlike with my previous attempts, however, I was steadily making progress. While actively pumping chakra away from my gate, my limbs felt tight and inflated, as if someone had given me a blood transfusion but pumped me up with too much extra fluid. It was extremely uncomfortable, and I knew I was on the precipice of blowing off all my limbs. But holy shit, it was working. After an extended session, which I privately called putting on the jets, as my canals alarmingly felt like jacuzzi nozzles, I still felt a bit of that tightness after I let up, which I took to mean that I had more chakra than when I began. I'm not a complete idiot. To make absolutely certain I hadn't majorly up, I went to the hospital and got an examination. The medic Nin was baffled. She clearly has an excess of chakra, she told Kazuhiro, and I almost let out a cheer of excitement. Has she had an unusual appetite as of late? Oh cool, I was being examined for a dysfunction in my gate of view. Strange thing to be excited about recognizing, but I guess it just feels nice to know things. She has been eating a lot, Kazuhiro mused. The medic Nin's hand glowed, and she hovered it over my stomach. There are micro tears in her kaiman, an important tenketsu. It looks to be on the mend, but I'll heal them just in case. Woo. Go lady. One less thing I have to worry about. I couldn't see the organ itself, just measure my internal chakra, so I hadn't even noticed the strain. How can you tell? I asked, and she an eyebrow at me. She probably wasn't used to people showing curiosity in her art. My medical jutsu, she replied, and realized she probably just thought I was stupid. I mean, obviously, I said, my face pink. I meant, how does your jutsu work? Do you feel the injuries in some way? In a sense, different injuries bear different textures. It's somewhat akin to rolling a ball over an uneven surface. You can feel what's underneath, even though you aren't touching it directly. How I know what texture corresponds to what injury, that's a matter of exposure, combined with an intimate understanding of human anatomy. Do you have an interest in medicine? Interest was a strong word, but it could certainly come in handy. Especially since I was committed to messing around with my internals. Maybe field medicine, but I can't imagine myself working in a hospital, I replied, and she gave a considering hum. I wonder if she would have shared more tips with me if I had just lied and told her my dream was to become a world-class medic nin. If the discomfort is too much, I can teach you to drain your chakra, she offered, moving back to the subject of our visit. Nope, I said quickly. I mean, I can do it myself. I demonstrated my jutsu, and the woman's eyes widened. Oh, my, she said, clearly taken aback. Well, yes, that would work. But it's not very uncomfortable, I lied, canceling the jutsu quickly to conserve chakra. What would happen if I just left it? If you can bear the sensation, I suspect only good things for an aspiring kunoichi, the medic said, and I could barely rein in my reaction. The excess, as long as it doesn't build up too far, will slowly stretch your pathways, making them larger and increasing your chakra capacity in the long run. Something that's far easier and safer to do at your age, while your body is so malleable. This degree of sudden expansion later in life could cause tears in the lining too big and too numerous to heal before your body suffers critical failure. Ah, yes, the words every patient wants to hear in a doctor's office. Critical failure. How will I know if the problem gets too bad? I asked immediately. Oh, you'll know, she said ominously. If you feel extreme pain, return at once. Although, I don't think you have to worry. Your kaiman had already halted its unusual stimulation of chakra by the time I examined you, so unless there's another dysfunction of some kind, you won't experience another surge of chakra like this again. That's what you think. But I didn't like the idea of waiting until it was too late to diagnose myself. Some limits shouldn't be crossed, and I needed to find out where mine lay. What was the jutsu this medic was using? Some kind of diagnostic technique. I'd have to look and see if there are any instructions on using it in my texts. I have a question, I asked. If this is such a rare and beneficial thing, why don't medics like yourself try and induce it in Shinobi? Healing with medical ninjutsu requires impeccable control and a precision that cannot be matched in any other discipline, she lectured. I highly doubt a medic that skilled exists anywhere in the elemental nations. And also, the kaiman isn't an ordinary tenketsu. If it is not treated with the appropriate delicacy, the patient might face devastating consequences. You are very fortunate that your injury occurred at your age, and that the consequences are to your benefit. People with similar afflictions have not been nearly so lucky. I really wanted to brag about how luck had nothing, well, not much, to do with it, but I held my tongue. Kazuhiro might restrict my freedoms in the future, and frankly, he would be right too. If I, as an adult, heard about a child doing something so outrageous, I would consider it my moral duty to put a stop to it. Or worse, I could be forced into some lab somewhere instead of being allowed to join the shinobi ranks. That would suck. Do you know when my chakra network will adjust? I asked, but she shook her head. There's no way of knowing for sure. Just listen to your body, slowly, the sensation will go away. Hopefully, not too slowly. I don't know how long I'm capable of powering the Chisana Hikari no Jutsu with my current reserves, so I'd much rather be safe than sorry. So, over the next couple of days, I manually topped off my reserves, keeping my pathways tight and just shy of bursting. It really, really sucked. I couldn't wait for my week to be up. And not soon enough, it was. Endo Ayumu stared down at the little girl, who had been waiting for her team to arrive, leaning against the wall of the tunnel. She looked nonchalant, but the Jonin hadn't earned the moniker Unfoolable Ayumu for nothing. She was both an excellent censor and a near-peerless judge of body language. The girl was slightly nervous, but that was overshadowed by her excitement. I hope you haven't come to waste my time, Ayumu asked, just to see what she'd say or do. She felt that a person showed their true character when frightened, so that was the emotion she usually tried to elicit. I hope so too, she said, her voice cheerful despite its throatiness, and Ayumu blinked at the unexpected response. Your words imply uncertainty, but your tone doesn't match, she noted. You better be taking this seriously. Oh, you have no idea how seriously I'm taking this, she said, her grin turning a bit savage. Curious. But for your information, I learned how to perform the jutsu within 24 hours of you teaching it to me. However, I've never actually tested how long I am able to hold it. Then you're not taking this seriously, Ayumu said, a dangerous look creeping over her face that had her quietly watching students edge backwards unconsciously. Though that might have had more to do with the wisps of killing intent that she let off. The girl wet her lips, but that was the only indication she felt it at all. I didn't think I'd be able to hold it for 5 minutes, she admitted. At first. So I developed a technique to ensure that I could. There was no technique that could increase a person's chakra capacity in such a short time, or one that would allow someone to replenish chakra without the assistance of a skilled medic nin, so Ayumu's expression grew even more frosty. I would have told you soldier pills were against the rules if I thought you would be stupid enough to use them, she warned. The pills were the only explanation she could think of that would replicate such a feat, and they wreaked havoc on a user's body. As such, they should only be used as a last resort. If a 3-year-old were to use one, they would probably suffer immediate kidney failure. No soldier pills, she promised. But I won't keep the both of us in suspense any longer. She molded the hand seals and a light emanated from her palm as she raised it towards the roof of the cave. And the time starts now. They waited, and waited, and waited. The only sound in the tunnels was from her own brats, who shuffled their feet in impatience. As a censor, Ayumu was more familiar than most with how much chakra a person of a specific demographic should have. Which was how she knew that someone of this kid's age, even if their parents were absolute chakra monsters, shouldn't be able to hold the jutsu past the 4-minute mark, and that was purely from a chakra capacity standpoint. There was the skill component as well to consider. However, that 4 minutes came and went, and the light didn't so much as flicker. Then, it was over. Your 5 minutes are up, the Jonin announced, not even needing to count the seconds. Cool, the girl said. But she didn't let her arm drop, or let the light extinguish. Obviously, the kid wanted to prove a point. Immature and slightly obnoxious as it was, Ayumu decided not to interrupt her, mostly out of her own piqued curiosity. She hadn't cared enough to look at the kid's chakra before, but now Ayumu extended her sixth sense to the girl. It was only due to her extensive conditioning with the red ogres that allowed her to keep the surprise out of her posture. The girl wasn't putting up a front. She really did have plenty of chakra left. But even stranger were the irregular movements of her chakra. When a jutsu was formed, it usually exited a single or localized group of tenketsu. Chakra for that jutsu would flow to that tenketsu to be used up in the process, and if the jutsu was sustained for a period of time, chakra from farther parts of the body would have to be sucked towards the tenketsu as a vacuum was formed within the chakra network. This was the reason that sustaining jutsu was so hard. Eventually, the chakra nearest to the tenketsu would be used up more quickly than it could be replenished, leaving a void that caused the jutsu to fail, damaging the user's body in the process. However, the girl's chakra network seemed to be doing the opposite. Instead of using up the chakra nearest to the tenketsu on her hand, it was siphoning the extra chakra in her legs first, and at an impressive rate. No void was being formed in the slightest. Are you doing that consciously? Ayumu asked. What do you mean? With your chakra, she clarified, and the girl raised an eyebrow. Shit. You're a censor, aren't you? Answer the question, Ayumu ordered, and the girl sighed. I am, she said. Her arm was trembling from being held up for so long. All my preparation was focused on bolstering my chakra reserves, and I didn't even realize there was another part of the puzzle. Good thing I can improvise. Otherwise, my light may have gone out a while ago. She grinned, and not in a nice way. Sneaky, sensei. I wasn't supposed to pass this test, was I? I already have 3 snot-nosed brats that I have to keep from drowning, Ayumu said, unashamedly. The 3 brats in question didn't say anything, but she could feel their agitation from the comment. I didn't want to have to concern myself with another. But if someone else walked in on you splashing about in a restricted training area, they may not have been as forgiving as me. So you're saying you did this out of the kindness of your heart? She teased, and Ayumu snorted, not deigning to comment on that. You said you focused on bolstering your chakra reserves, she recalled. How did you increase them in such a short span of time? The girl seemed to consider the question. It's not unrelated to this other thing I'm doing, she finally said. I have extremely good chakra control. It's part that, part eating a lot and part meditation. I doubt anyone other than me can produce the same results. The light still wasn't out, and they were well past the 8-minute mark. Who are your parents? Ayumu asked. My mother was Omori Mana, she said. And my father was Amai Hisashi. They're dead. Ayumu vaguely recognized the father's name. He was listed as a B rank threat, once upon a time. Maybe her reserves were naturally larger than average. Perhaps she even had a hidden bloodline. Are you in the care of the orphanage? She asked, keeping the sympathy out of her voice. No self-respecting Iowa shinobi, prospective or official, would appreciate that. No, my god brother takes care of me. She nodded, sharply. What do you think about entering the academy early? The girl's face lit up, even under the strain of maintaining her technique. A child joined the academy at 5, typically, though some were a bit older depending on what month their birthdays fell. 3 is still too young, even after this, she said, waving her hand. But to enter the academy early, you need a Jonin sponsor. When you turn 4, I would be willing to act as one. I would love nothing more, she said quickly, and the Jonin narrowed her eyes. This decision isn't one that you should make so casually. It would be prudent for you to think it over. What's there to think over? The girl asked, confused. I'm going to be a shinobi. If you're offering to sponsor me, I assume you must think I'm ready now, and I'm nearing the limit of my self-study. I know I'll be behind the other kids in terms of growth, but it seems you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what the academy entails, Ayumu interrupted. There are no kids in the academy. There are only shinobi in training, and you will be treated as such. In every way that matters, your childhood will end the moment you step through its gate. Iowa does not coddle her shinobi, and by choosing to enroll early, you will receive even less sympathy. I'm not looking to be coddled, the girl insisted, flexing her fingers so hard they cracked on their own. I'm actually quite sick of being treated my age. No, she didn't understand. Once you declare your intent to become a shinobi in an official capacity, Ayumu said, seriously, you will take upon yourself great responsibility. The choices you make will cease to impact solely yourself. If, for example, you break your arm outside of class, training, playing, it doesn't matter. That will be viewed as the sabotage of an Iwagakure asset, and you will face proportionate consequences. You will live solely for the good of the village. Can you bear that weight as you are now? Or would you prefer to delay it for another year and remain a child? At least she seemed to be treating the decision with the weight it deserved, now. Talk it over with your brother, Ayumu insisted. Hear what he has to say on the matter. At just over 10 minutes, the light sputtered out, and the girl cursed. Thanks for the offer, sensei, she said, shaking out her hand. She looked a bit clammy. I'll talk to my niece-san about it. For now, though, I don't think I'm up for swimming. I'll see you next week. As she turned, Ayumu spoke up. I'm already reserving this place for 1.5 hours. I might as well round it up to 2, so you can come a half hour early in the future. The girl nodded and continued limping out of the cave. That was very nice of you, sensei, Tsuchi, one of her students, noted. Nice wasn't exactly the correct word, in Ayumu's opinion, but she wasn't concerned about the semantics. I'm just doing my duty as an Iowa shinobi to nurture talent, she replied. It wasn't something she did often or lightly, especially if she wasn't getting paid for it. However, Ayumu's gut told her one thing. That child had the mental fortitude and the skill to be someone, someday. And it was never a bad idea to have a person like that in her debt. Ow, ow, ow. The tightness in my chakra pathways was gone, but in its place was an even deeper ache that pulsed through my entire being. The processes that led to an increase in chakra capacity were supposed to be gradual, but now my canals were like rubber bands that had been stretched over something a bit too big for too long. Once the object was removed, they were permanently bigger, looser and fatigued. I needed a medic nin. No, wait, I needed more chakra first. Not nearly as much as before, but enough to add some tension to my canals. For that, I needed to eat and meditate, so that was the first thing I did. I crammed as much meat into my mouth as I could, and as I was in the process of making a slob out of myself, Kazuhiro walked in. Lo, Ni-san, I said, a mouthful of food. You're back from your mission. He stared at me, a complex emotion in his face as I tried to wipe my own off properly with a napkin. I got back yesterday evening, he said finally. I came in to see you but you were dissociating. I thought you were seriously ill. Nothing I said got through to you. I would have taken you to the hospital, but Obasan said that this was normal for you, over the last couple days. She said you'd be fine in the morning. Ah, now I feel bad. He looked really concerned. I'm sorry, Ni-san, I apologized. I won't do that again. It's just that, healing from the chakra thing was really uncomfortable. But I think I'm better now. Well, not better, I hedged. I think I just got over a stage last night. Now I just feel sore all over, but in a very different way. Do you need a medic? He asked. Maybe. I'll try and stick it out, I said. If I admitted I needed one, he would insist on taking me right away, and I needed to do some finagling with my internals first. I feel bad for bothering them so much. Are you sure? He pressed. I promise I'll tell you if I really need it. Then, softer, I said, sorry for making you and Akane Obasan worry. He ruffled my hair. It's okay, Imouto. We know you were sick. But I wasn't sick. I chose to do this, and chose to push my family away in the process, so I kinda felt like a piece of shit. I wasn't used to having family that cared wasn't the right word. If something was really wrong, to the point that I approached them over it, my last family might try to solve the issue, if it wasn't stupid. But if I didn't, I'd be given space until I took care of it myself. Then I'd be received as if my period of reclusiveness had never happened. Having a brother who actually gave a shit, it was new. I wasn't yet accustomed to it, but at the same time, I didn't quite hate it. I need to take a nap, I told Kazuhiro. It was hard to sleep last night. But after that, do you want to do something? He smiled, gently. Yeah, he said. I would like that. Do something, was incredibly vague, but we settled on eating out at a yakiniku place. Out of all the food I'd tried in this new life, those delectable meat skewers were probably my favorite. Ni-san, I said between voracious bites. What's the academy like? Warning was somewhat jarring. My childhood would end, full stop. I would be treated solely as an asset of Iwagakure. Surely that was an exaggeration, right? The academy, he repeated, screwing up his expression as he tried to decide how to best answer the question. The academy was difficult. He said it in a way that implied his true thoughts on the matter were far harsher. Not really what I wanted to hear. You hated it, I surmised. I did not hate it, he lied. There were some parts that were tolerable. I made many close friends, of course, they all died. Oof. I hated how cavalierly he said that. However, I must admit, my life did get somewhat easier once I graduated into the Genin Corps. Being in the academy is harder than being a full-fledged ninja. I clarified, because what the? No, I wouldn't say that, he told me, quickly. The warfront was definitely more stressful, and most of the time more physically difficult. I only meant that, once I graduated, things became far less strict. I didn't have to compete with anyone. I didn't have superiors breathing down my neck at all times. Iwao told me that, If you break your arm outside of class, you'll get punished for it, I said, softly. Well, of course. The skills they teach you can be easily misused. You could hurt yourself and others with them quite seriously. Anyone who does that should face repercussions. He said that you'd get in trouble, even if you were just playing, I pressed. Without using ninja skills. There was an implied question in the statement that he couldn't willfully ignore. I think, at some level, he realized that this was an important conversation to me that spanned further than the academy. There is something that every Iowa shinobi should know, he stated, sitting up straighter. It's called the Will of Stone. Like the Will of Fire. Did every major village have its own special dogma? I wonder which one came first. Stones at the base are what makes a mountain strong, he declared. Everyone is important, and that means everyone shares responsibility. Any act that threatens the stability of the structure is, well, inexcusable. Think about it this way. If you injure yourself, and that injury gets aggravated later on in combat, you could put yourself, your comrades, and your mission in jeopardy. Once you begin to walk the path of shinobi, you become part of something bigger than yourself. Everything you do must be for the good of Iowa. It was a lot of pressure to put on a child, but though Kazuhiro wasn't a particularly good orator, even I couldn't help but feel a little inspired. If I didn't have an entire lifetime of past memories, I might have fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. Just as he clearly had. Don't worry about the academy, Imouto, he said with what was supposed to be a reassuring smile. I'm 100% certain that you won't have the same trouble with it as I had. In fact, I bet our experiences will be completely different altogether. I was never very bright, or a good student. I could never meet my sensei's expectations. You will surpass them, I'm sure of it. If I thought I was anime protagonist enough to escape the consequences of my little stunt scot-free, I was very wrong. I had increased my chakra capacity by a significant amount, but not the reserves themselves, bar conscious effort, or my chakra regeneration rate. So now, the rest of my body had to play catch-up, which took months. The medics couldn't really do much for me either. Perhaps I had a faulty understanding of what medical ninjutsu was capable of, which was very likely, or Iowa's medical division was just shit. I was leaning towards the first. The medics I'd encountered seemed competent, and everything canon about medic ninjutsu that I knew came from the lips of Tsunade, who was a peerless prodigy at the art. It wasn't fair to hold others to her standard. All they could really do was give me pain meds. Which I gratefully accepted, don't get me wrong, but I was hoping to just be, healed. Turns out I wouldn't be able to spam this strategy until I got Kisame-leveled chakra reserves, though it might get me close if I kept with it. I would definitely have to dial back the intensity, however, and increase the timeframe by several magnitudes. But I was incredibly satisfied with the result. Once a week, not as much as I would like but better than nothing, I could get my swimming fix, and I could even around for half an hour before and her squad got there and I had to pretend to get serious. Akane Obasan was used to me going off on my own during the day. Iowa thankfully wasn't like in my old world where young children needed to be hovered over at all hours of the day. Kazuhiro was frequently off on missions, so neither noticed. Once my chakra had settled into something more resembling normalcy, I started on another project, one that had haunted my fantasies ever since I first learned about the gates. My first step was achieving mastery of the Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, Little Light technique. I practiced it at all hours of the day, paying close attention to the behavior of my chakra as I used it. As an unintended side effect, I gained the ability to use it on my opposite hand as well, though it couldn't be transferred to any other area as the jutsu was created to be used with the chakra network in a person's hand. Not long after, I was comfortable enough with the jutsu to sequester the exact amount of chakra it required to be sustained for a minute in my hand, meaning it would cut off on its own after a minute of activation. I repeated it over and over until my precision was exact. Then I began to laugh, as I had just invented a unit of measuring chakra. A Hikari, I named it. The amount of chakra it takes to maintain a lesser chakra light for a minute. I wasted no time in measuring my gates, once I figured out how. By their very nature, they sat closed and disconnected from the largest canals. However, that only kept chakra from getting out. Each gate was still fed through inward flowing tributaries, the largest of which I could slip a submarine through. It took many attempts to be able to sustain each submarine long enough to get a comprehensive reading. Due in part to the behavior of my chakra work, there weren't many tenketsu inside my tenketsu to pulse, and the gate itself was beyond my control, and the shape of the gates themselves. Some, like the Simon and Kaiman, even had multiple, connected ventricles that made the exercise even trickier. However, I succeeded in the end. Kaiman, Logic, 13.5. Human, Creativity, 14. Simon, Yin Production, 18. Showman, Chakra Affinity, 2. Toman, Strength, 4. Kaiman, Yang Production, 16.5. Kyoman, Speed, 4.5. I rounded to the nearest half number for simplicity. From what my medical books suggested, the chakra contained within the gates boosted the associated trait, not simply dictated them. Meaning that the number of Hikaris present in each gate was more like a stat multiplier than a stat itself. Although, the actual trait conversely influenced the amount of chakra as well. For example, a higher brain activity in the left hemisphere would lead the body to allocate more chakra to the gate of opening. It wasn't surprising that my advanced cognition had fed into my Kaiman and Cuman, but I was surprised at how disproportionate they were compared to my other stats. Except for my Kaiman and Simon, which were rather staggering. But taking into account the nature of the gates in question, I probably shouldn't be surprised. Their primary function was to house physical and spiritual energy respectively until it needed to be merged and distributed, after all. So the amount of chakra they contained probably shouldn't be compared to the amount present in other gates. Out of curiosity, I also measured the Shimon, the gate of death. I didn't think it could offer me anything, and I was too scared to even tamper with it at all, but I was curious about its capacity. Shimon, death, 21.5. That's how much chakra it took to run my heart for some reason, even though humans and animals in my old world got along just fine without any mystical energy. Maybe that chakra had some hidden purpose. If I was ever in a position to speak civilly with Tsunade about it, as if that could ever happen, I would. I also sorely wished I could look at other people's stats for reference, but that was similarly impossible. I wasn't a censor, I couldn't manipulate another person's chakra, and I certainly couldn't spread my awareness to another person's chakra network. Which meant I had no one to compare myself to. But that was okay. If I had that capability, I might settle for simply being better than anyone else my age, something I couldn't afford to do if I wanted to survive in this world. Now, the only person I was sure I could surpass was myself, and I enjoyed watching those numbers go up ever so slowly as I continued the grind. The only one that remained completely stagnant was my already lowest stat, the showman. I had no idea what to do about that, as I didn't even know what my elemental affinity was, much less how to develop it. While I desperately wished for it to be water, I knew deep in my heart that it was either earth or wind. Those were the affinities my parents possessed, Doden for my father, and Futon for my mother, according to the Shinobi registrar entry Kazuhiro requisitioned for me, and this kind of thing usually boiled down to genetics. But maybe my past life experiences would come out on top, who knows? Oof. Barely got that done in time for my self-imposed deadline. I had an especially hard time making this particular chapter coherent, probably because of all the technical explanations. So Kaseki gets to enroll a year early. Thank God. Finding ways for her to occupy her time when she's barely out of toddlerhood is getting more and more difficult. Now, the plot can progress. Alas, we're not quite there yet. Kaseki has caught the eye of another Jonin, and this one's a censor. She's got to watch her back. Kazuhiro's speech and the expectations laid out in them, as up as they kind of were, didn't dissuade me from enrolling in the academy early. Mainly because I was bored, but also because I knew the Third Shinobi World War was fast approaching, and a year was too long to waste. I was already plateauing, I needed direction. That being said, I wasn't sure if the Iowa Academy would be more akin to a regular school, like the Konoha Academy in the anime, or like the ridiculous and violent institution they had in Kiri. My guess was that it would fall somewhere in the middle, so I should probably try to be in peak physical condition at all times. Which meant I wouldn't be able to risk utilizing my chakra inflating technique. At least, until I had a better grasp on the academy standards and my peers' conditioning levels. As far as I knew, I was so far above them that I needed to give myself a handicap to fit in. Ha, as if. I had to admit, my canals weren't the only things inflated these days. Being able to see my progress in such great detail had done terrible things to my ego. I hope there were a few people in the academy that could cut me down to size, because if not, I was going to be absolutely insufferable. For now, I had to make do with Kazuhiro, who actively tried not to knock me down as many pegs as he probably should have. I had asked him for training, especially in regards to taijutsu, as I didn't want to enter the academy with no knowledge on the subject. I knew martial arts basics from my past life, like how to put the power of my entire body into strikes, how to maintain stability and how to disarm attackers, but I had never been in a real hand-to-hand fight whilst in the Navy outside of spars in boot camp. Kazuhiro was happy to help, while he was in the village at least, and began teaching me the principles of the stone fist. It was an unimaginative name for the standard Iwa taijutsu style, which prioritized defense over speed and quick strikes. Which was a shame because defense really wasn't my thing. It fit Iwa's modus operandi, however. The ideal exchange for an Iwa nin was to use earth ninjutsu to hamper and otherwise crush the enemy, so taijutsu was mostly utilized as only a buffer. Once the shinobi had warded off the enemy, they would disengage to attack from another angle with their ninjutsu. To me, it seemed like a defeatist mentality. Enemies were going to get in close, you could try and stop it all you want, but if there was anything I had learned in my last war, it was that enemies would always find a way to get where they weren't supposed to be, no matter what technology or tools you had at your disposal. It still burned that I didn't know where that torpedo came from. So no, I wasn't going to rely solely on traps and mid to long range ninjutsu to fight. I wasn't going to play defense until I could flee, or until someone came to save me like a damsel in distress. I was going to ice the. That being said, I was never going to be a taijutsu prodigy, and I didn't particularly want to be one either. I needed a short-range weapon. Not a sword or blade of any kind. I had those in my old world, which, to me, made them boring. Plus, they inhibited my ability to form hand seals. I eventually wanted a signature, short-range ninjutsu, one that wasn't as intensive or conspicuous as the Rasengan or Chidori. That was a long way off, though. For now, I could settle for impressing the academy sensei. That's what I told myself, anyway. At first. But that was boring and frustrating, and I felt like I deserved a win. Just a little of that ninja magic, as a treat. So, I badgered Kazuhiro into teaching me the Kawarimi no Jutsu replacement technique. Physically performing the technique wasn't hard, and it wasn't incredibly chakra intensive either. As Kazuhiro had explained, it was more of a mental exercise than a physical one, as aiming and firing the projectile tether was where most of the difficulty lay. Especially since looking at the target was a big no-no, as it would announce where you were going to end up. I could see now why people didn't spam it to get around, even though it looked so cool and convenient. There was much discussion in the fandom on how it worked, as it seemed pretty broken. In comparison, the reality of its workings was somewhat tame. It did teach me a little something about how jutsu in general worked, which I learned when I asked Kazuhiro how to stop when executing the technique, and not fall prey to inertia like I was certain I would. I'm not sure what you're asking, Imouto, he said with a frown. You just stop. Yes, but if I'm being flung in a direction, I should have momentum, right? I pointed out. I can't just choose to stop and stop, can I? You don't have to do anything consciously, he answered, finally seeming to understand my confusion. The function of the Kawarimi no Jutsu is to swap you with an object, and bring you to a clean stop. Unless it is executed improperly and with different hand seals, it will do just that. I'm not sure why it hadn't clicked until that very moment. Jutsu were kind of like computer programs, instructions were written into the code itself, and the resulting function would produce the same result every time it was executed. Any customization had to be either entered into the hand seals themselves, or reflected in your application of the jutsu. For example, pumping a Kaiden jutsu with too much chakra wouldn't make the fire bigger or hotter, or vice versa. It would simply cause the jutsu to fail, because it wasn't designed with that amount of chakra in mind. There must be exceptions, because time duration was supposedly one of those factors, and I was able to hold my light until my chakra ran out without having to recast the jutsu. Kazuhiro couldn't explain what they were, though, so that would remain a mystery for now. Once the jutsu exited the caster's body, however, they might be able to guide its path or otherwise manipulate its behavior with good enough chakra control. So long as the jutsu itself permitted it, sometimes certain intrinsic characteristics got in the way. Like the kawarimi, for example, the technique pulled its user in one direction extremely quickly, while dragging an object towards them at equivalent speeds. Without the pull of the object, you yourself could not move forward. Therefore, trying to arc the tether around a tree or something would instead cause you and the object to slam full force into the tree regardless. This information, to me, was revolutionary, and would be incredibly valuable in the future. For now though, I could enjoy using my new jutsu, and holy shit was it fun. It was like experiencing lag in real life, but on command. I was always a bit of a thrill seeker, and sometimes, if I was bored, I would simply rubber band myself around a room until I got sick or used up too much chakra. It was great for comedic effect as well, to both Akane Obasan's and Kazuhiro's exasperation. On the subject of my god brother, he had changed a lot over the last year. So much so that even Akane Obasan noticed. He wasn't quite as depressed all the time, which I hoped I could take credit for. He was also more muscular, and I found him training frequently. He was only a chunin, but I was still in awe of all the earth jutsu I watched him perform. Especially one in particular. That was Doden. Doro Nami o Sukamu no Jutsu, earth style. Grasping mud wave technique, he said, a pleased smile on his face. I'm not surprised you gravitated towards it. It was your father's signature jutsu, after all. The jutsu was rather formidable, so long as the enemy wasn't expecting it. Essentially, it loosened the ground, sending up a wave of mud high enough to crest over my head, not that that was saying much, as I was currently only a little over 3 feet tall. It would part around any obstacle that was rooted to the ground, which would have made it almost useless if that was all there was to it. However, at Kazuhiro's will, it could freeze, trapping whatever it had conformed around in solid stone. Mai-2-san used it. I said in wonder, mostly because referring to Hisashi as Mai-2-san made Kazuhiro happy. He invented it, in fact, Kazuhiro confirmed, his smile getting a touch morose. It was the only jutsu I was able to learn from him above C rank. I wasn't skilled enough back then. That's okay, Ni-san. I said, trying to bring him out of his melancholy. It seems really versatile. The target wasn't aware enough to simply jump over it, although that wasn't strictly the point. I knew its true utility would present itself with allies at the user's back. Few targets could change their trajectory in midair. I would love to learn it and carry on Mai-2-san's legacy. His grin returned, and I mentally gave myself a pat on the back. Mai Hisashi wasn't here, though I probably would have loved him if he was, or at least had complicated, generally positive leaning feelings towards him like my last one. Instead, I had Kazuhiro, who I had no doubts about. It's not something I can teach you right now, I'm afraid, he said regretfully. Mastering Doden Moguragakur no Jutsu is a prerequisite, which is something you'll do in the academy. Ah, the hiding like a mole jutsu. In retrospect, I wasn't surprised to hear this was a derivative of that. I'll learn it the first chance I get, I promised. Kazuhiro was still sent on missions extremely frequently, and I didn't want to attempt to learn this particular jutsu without a devoted supervisor. It kinda scared me. He ruffled my hair. I know you will. Iwao was a strange kid. He reminded me quite a bit of young Sasuke, from the brief clips I'd been treated to. You know, before Itachi killed the rest of his family and literally tortured him with his Tsukuyomi for 3 days straight. As young Sasuke was devoted to his brother, who was too busy to give him the time of day, so too was Iwao devoted to his father, who was also too busy to give him the time of day. It kind of broke my heart a bit to watch. After most of our play dates, the older Ishida sent a subordinate to pick Iwao up, but the few times he was able to show up in person, the little guy was so overjoyed. I tried to be there for him, to help maintain his innocence a little while before this harsh world stripped it away. However, once I was fully literate, I began to get very little out of our meetings, as Iwao seriously referred to them as. I tried not to get annoyed with the distraction from my own training. I was basically performing community service. Though I supposed, from another lens, I could call it networking. But then the little shit did something I didn't expect. He broke the rules. Iwao-kun, I said hesitantly. Are those shuriken? He said excitedly. I took them from my 2-san's supply closet. Live weapons were strictly prohibited by Iwao's father and Kazuhiro, and not just for safety's sake. To have any sort of proficiency at Bukijutsu, one had to devote a significant amount of time towards developing muscle memory. However, a young kid's muscles, even those of a ninja kid that trained a lot, were deficient in a multitude of ways, and factors like limb growth and brain development weren't far enough along either. It was a well-researched fact that any training in that area would have to be unlearned later in life. I don't know, Iwao-kun, I said hesitantly, trying to steer him away from the idea. Your 2-san and my ni-san wouldn't be happy with us. Well, they're not here, are they? The boy asked, a hint of bitterness on his face. I winced. Yikes. We reached that point already, huh? I should have tried to convince him better, but he didn't like it when I used grown-up words like studies and experiments. I was pretty sure he'd mess around with them whether I was here or not, so I thought it was my moral duty to at least supervise. Okay, Iwao-kun, I said finally. But we have to do it somewhere people can't see us. I don't want to get in trouble. I know, Iwao said. I'm not stupid. I found an abandoned training ground we can use, it even already has targets. I sighed heavily as my inner warning bells rang loud and clear. Lead the way, then. To Iwao's credit, the training ground, more like a small park, did look abandoned. It was near the base of one of the mountains, this one about as far away from the Tsuchikage's palace as it could be. There were 3 rectangular boulders, obviously lifted out of the ground with earth-style ninjutsu, and upon each of them was a slightly rotten log, all bearing dents and gouges. I suppose these were the targets Iwao mentioned. I doubted their damage came from thrown weaponry, but I supposed it didn't matter. They would do the job better than stone, at least. Between it and the nearest cliff face beyond were a couple of small shacks that looked just as derelict. I had no idea what they could have been used for, certainly not as residences. Perhaps as storage of some kind. I decided I didn't care enough to investigate. Do you know how to hold them at least? I asked Iwao, because I sure as hell didn't. Yeah, he replied, to my surprise. It's like this. He sandwiched the weapon between his index and middle fingers. Though he clenched it tightly, there was no chance the sharp edges could pierce his skin. I was willing to believe that he was correct in that this was a technically correct way to hold the shuriken. What mystified me was how anyone was supposed to pick them up with any decent speed in the midst of battle. That would be a question for my academy sensei when the time was right. He let out a yell, throwing the star with all of his might at the log in the middle. It went almost straight down into the ground, piercing through a tuft of sod that was almost as brown as the dirt beneath it. He flushed in embarrassment, but I pretended not to notice. I think, when my ni-san throws them, he does it from the side, I said instead. I don't recall ever seeing Kazuhiro throw a shuriken, this was just logic. If you throw the star vertically, from up to down, it would tend to go down. If you threw it parallel, it would be more likely to veer to the left or right, or, with some practice, hit straight on. Yeah, okay, he mumbled. He tried again, and missed the target by a wide margin. It didn't nosedive this time, but the 4-year-old didn't have the strength to get it all the way either. That was much better, Iwao-kun. I tried to praise. Maybe if you stand closer, it might be better. Shinobi have to be able to hit things from far away, he argued, and I frowned. Iwao didn't usually act like this. You will be able to, Iwao-kun, I said placidly. But wouldn't it be easier to improve our accuracy at a shorter range first? Then, we can take a step back, again and again, until we can throw them from far away and hit the center every time. He took a deep breath, obviously annoyed, but followed my suggestion. His temper seemed to abate when he began to hit the target. Every once in a while, at least, and those that did make contact all bounced straight out. Only because the wood's so hard, he claimed, and I nodded emphatically in agreement, even though I could probably pierce the rotting wood with my thumbs if I had the desire. Do you want to try? He offered magnanimously after half an hour. Oh, no, it's okay, Iwao-kun, I said hastily. I don't think I'll be very good at it. I'm not very strong, and I'm scared of getting cut. You can't be scared of getting cut if you want to be a shinobi, he pointed out, which was a fair point. Of course, I had only said that as an excuse. I know, I said. But I'm not ready yet. You keep having fun, Iwao-kun. He frowned slightly. I'm not having fun. Okay. That was a bit out of left field, especially considering how full of laughter he was just minutes ago. You're not? I asked, a bit perplexed. Well, I am, he backtracked. But I'm not doing this for fun. I'm doing this to become a great shinobi. Oh, I said awkwardly. I get it, Iwao-kun. Ganbare. That didn't exactly appear to be the response he wanted either, but Iwao wasn't as outspoken as most kids his age would be. He simply frowned and returned to his throwing stars. I could all but hear your reputation with Ishida Iwao has decreased by one notification in my head. Eventually, he decided that his accuracy at a distance of 20 feet was sufficient, it had barely improved, and doubled the distance. It went just as poorly as his second attempt, and there were even more breaks in between as Iwao had to search for all the shuriken he missed. Bored, I allowed my consciousness to retreat partially into my canals, specifically the ones in my chest. The region was just as complex as my hands were, and it was many times the size, which meant my mental map making was extremely slow. The unexpected sound of a creaky door opening partially roused me from my daze, and a curse of frustration finished the job. I snapped to alertness and watched in horror as Iwao, so frustrated he was almost crying, flung his remaining shuriken with all his strength, putting almost no effort into accuracy. Much more unfortunately, he had chosen the exact wrong moment to let loose. You brat, another kid, several years older, cursed at the top of his lungs. He hadn't even fully closed the door of the nearest shack, and was clutching his wrist in pain. I could see the barest traces of blood, and my heart froze. He bent down to scoop up the shuriken, and in doing so, I saw he had only been hit in the back of his wrist. I sighed in relief. The wound was merely superficial. It wasn't even bleeding that much. I'm sorry, Iwao apologized profusely. I didn't know anyone was in there. I didn't, I'm sorry. You cut me, you piece of shit. The boy yelled, anger not quelled in the slightest by the younger and much smaller boy's apology. What's a little baby doing with real shuriken anyway? I was just practicing, Iwao stuttered, his eyes welling up with tears. Practicing. The older boy said mockingly. What? Practicing for when you'll be kicked out of the academy? He stepped forward threateningly before peering at the wooden log that served as Iwao's target moments ago. I should beat the shit out of you just for using my training ground, much less hitting me. But it looks like you didn't even make a scratch on my targets. How can a failure like you ever be a shinobi? He said he was sorry. I spoke up, taking a step forward. Accept the apology, and we'll go. What? You need an even shrimpier girl to fight your battles. The kid said, ignoring me completely. No. A real shinobi, no, a real man, wouldn't run away just like that. You drew blood, so I gotta return the favor. Shuriken for shuriken. Whoa there. Stand there and don't move. If you do, you'll bring shame upon yourself and your family. And you'll never be able to call yourself a shinobi. Don't listen to him, Iwao. Let's just go, I pleaded. And you, what would your academy sensei say about this? What? Are you gonna snitch? He sneered at me. You'll be next if you don't shut your mouth. Iwao. Just, shut up, Kasaiki, my friend told me stoically, and I flinched. He's right. I messed up, and I don't want to shame myself or my family. He looked at the kid, trying to meet his gaze squarely. He couldn't quite manage to. You can do it. I could have screamed. Why were boys like this? And what was all this talk about honor? We were ninja, not samurai. Yeah, listen to the little shit stain, the bully goaded. Go back to your house and find some dolls to play with. And you, don't you dare move. He geared up to throw the shuriken Iwao had nicked him with, and it was clear he had actually received training. It was also clear that his retribution wouldn't be proportional. His eyes were cruel, and they weren't focused on Iwao's limbs. From the way he wound up his shot, I knew he was looking to maim. Okay. Enough was enough. Ram, boar, ox, dog, snake. Kawarimi no jutsu. In a flash, I substituted myself with the decrepit log, snatching the shuriken from his shock-loosened grip. An instant later, I levied the razor-sharp edge, one prong already tinged red, against the soft skin of his neck. He said he was sorry, I said softly. And he only gave you a scratch to begin with. Don't be a baby. The kid didn't so much as breathe. A word of advice, I continued, because the little shit was an opportunist. He was looking to hurt someone weaker than him, and if Iwao hadn't come along with an excuse, he would have just found someone else. In the world of Shinobi, you can't trust your eyes. You never know who you can get away with pushing around, and who will gut you if you try. Watch your back. I withdrew the shuriken and backed away, keeping my body language carefree to distract from my unwillingness to let him out of my sight. In a fair fight, I didn't relish my chances against him. He was a full head taller than me, and quite a bit more muscular. It's a good thing that bullies were cowards, because the moment I was far enough away, the boys scampered off as if I was the devil. I sighed and turned back to Iwao, who was looking at me with, oh no. His face was flushed deeper than I had ever seen. The tear tracks were still fresh, but the eyes they led to were dark with fury and shame. His posture was defensive, his hands were clenched into tight fists and he was breathing heavily. You can do the substitution jutsu? He asked rhetorically, an emotional tremor in his voice. I hadn't told Iwao that I had learned the kawarimi, because I suspected this would be his reaction. Only more mild. But he was already fiercely ashamed, both from his lack of success with the shuriken and the display after it, and his embarrassment and helplessness needed a target. With the bully gone, I was the only option. Yes. I didn't know what else to say. Teach me, he demanded. I can't. The kawarimi wasn't like the Chisana Hikari. There was far more risk, more skill required to use, and it was more chakra intensive. Iwao wasn't mature, talented or self-aware enough to be trusted with it. Frankly, Kazuhiro shouldn't have taught me at this age. If I wasn't so in tune with my own chakra, I might have seriously injured myself in my attempts to perfect it. My ni-san made me promise not to show or teach it to anybody, I lied. And your two-san said you're not allowed to learn it either, remember? Well, my two-san and your ni-san aren't here, are they? He said hotly, and a bitter resignation welled up inside me. I can't break my ni-san's trust, Iwao-kun, I retorted. He's the only family I have left. I didn't like playing the orphan card, especially to a literal child. But I needed to get out of this, and it worked each of the few times I brought it up. But not now, apparently. Bullshit, he snarled. You just want to keep looking down on me. Being Miss Perfect Kunoichi like everyone thinks you are. You want me to keep being useless so you can look better. That's not true. I insisted. I've never looked down on you. Except it was. I literally called our playdates community service in my head. But come on. I was an adult, and he was a child. How could we ever be on even footing? Yes you do. He shouted. You just want to make me look worse in front of two-san so you can take my place. Oh, that one was a bit out of left field. But clearly a long time coming. Your two-san isn't going to replace you with anyone, I said firmly. You're his flesh and blood. He might be busy at work, but he loves you. And I don't want to be adopted or whatever by him either. Why would you even think that? Because you keep showing off in front of him. He said hysterically, tears flooding down his cheeks. You keep showing off, and you're all he ever talks about anymore. Whenever I see him, he always talks about you. Asks what you can do now. Tells me to get training advice from you. He doesn't care about me. Ishida Sr. was a bit of a shit father. And had I really left that big of an impression on him? I don't even recall showing off anything major in front of him. Then my blood ran cold. I didn't show off anything major to him. But, While I didn't know exactly what his position was, I knew from Akane Obasan that he was high up in the chain of command, and that he did something with internal affairs. Iwao's dad was keeping tabs on me. Maybe even sending people to spy on me. That wasn't ideal. I don't want him to do that, I exclaimed. Let me talk to him, all. No, he screamed. Stay away from my two-san. He's mine. Just because yours is dead, doesn't mean you can have him. Okay, that wasn't an acceptable thing to say to anyone. That was very mean, Iwao-kun, I said, trying to maintain my compassion. I thought we were friends. You never wanted to be my friend, he claimed. And I never want to see you again. With that, he ran away, leaving me frozen in a defunct training ground. Despite his words, I still gathered the scattered shuriken, bound them together and left them on the outside of his windowsill. Hopefully he'd noticed them before his father discovered they were missing. Years after the disastrous final battle against Konoha, Iwa's famed explosion corps still hadn't recovered. Formed in the midst of the First Shinobi World War by the Bakuhatsu clan, who wielded the explosion release, the elite unit was tasked with fending off the more dangerous threats Iwa faced with extreme force. Even the most powerful shinobi couldn't take a well-placed explosion head-on. The Shidaime Kazekage could attest to that, and so could Lobo, the rogue Jinchuriki of the Rokubi, along with many other infamous names throughout history. But now they themselves were shattered, having lost their commander and heir to the Bakuhatsu clan. Leaving Bakuhatsu Gari to pick up the pieces. Damn you, Guro, he cursed, not nearly for the first or last time. Couldn't you have at least trained a successor before you went and blew yourself up? His cousin was a prodigy. He had been the first in 3 generations to successfully take the Mitsushita, 3-tongued Kinjutsu, transforming his already deadly explosion release into something with unparalleled range and versatility. The Bakuhatsu clan had forgotten what it was like to have someone with that Kinjutsu. The glory, the devastation, the power. Then Guro came along and reminded them. And worst of all, he died. Impossibly few people could be like Guro, but all the hot-headed youth of the Bakuhatsu clan thought they were among that number. They all attempted to gain the Kinjutsu, and while Gari tried to discourage them, many of their parents did the opposite. They each seemed to think that their children were exceptional, but all of them were proved to be wrong. The Mitsushita was labeled as a Kinjutsu for a reason. It required the corpses of 2 earth-natured shinobi, which were hard to obtain since the majority of said earth-natured shinobi were comrades. Guro earned his fame by slaying 2 senju, and perhaps it was their vitality that allowed the operation to be a success. Yes, operation. At its heart, this particular Kinjutsu was a body modification, one that implanted the corpses' mouths into the hands of the Bakuhatsu clan member. The chakra network in a person's hand, obviously, was incredibly complex, and so was the chakra network in a person's mouth. That was the reason so many ninjutsu appeared to be spat out. But if the recipient of the Kinjutsu didn't have the chakra manipulation and medical skill required to implant the mouths and marry both chakra networks, a third party had never successfully facilitated the procedure, the operation would fail. And in the process, the recipient would lose the ability to use jutsu forever. At least the process didn't sterilize them. From a purely genetic perspective, the Bakuhatsu clan may bounce back in time, but with an entire generation functionally missing, their descendants might never possess the skill and finesse that resulted from personal apprenticeship. Already, they were losing a significant amount of sway in the political arena, and Gari was fighting to keep the explosion core from being dissolved entirely, now that it was down to a measly 6 members. They needed more recruits. So, with regret, he made the choice to open up enrollment to shinobi not belonging to the Bakuhatsu clan. In doing so, he surrendered a great deal of his clan's remaining influence. Truthfully, it was barely a stop-gap solution. Who would join the explosion corps if they didn't have the explosion release? Possessing the bloodline granted some resistance to the explosions themselves. Additionally, the explosions they created were directional. Exploding tags could barely be aimed and they couldn't be resisted, so they were not ideal in most situations. Any new additions to the corps wouldn't have nearly the same utility. They might have to stop being a frontal assault unit altogether and become saboteurs instead. Maybe that would be for the best. Gari couldn't afford to lose any more of his kin now anyway. Decision made, he went to seek out a colleague. Finding him wasn't a problem, he barely left the basement of the Tsuchikage's palace these days. Getting him to realize Gari was present was, and he had to detonate a tiny explosion just to get his attention. Bakahatsu-san, he said at last, his voice hoarse from disuse. What brings you to my workshop? Before he could answer, the man cut him off. That is what I would say if I hadn't anticipated your arrival. I expected you weeks ago. The man stood up from the table he was hunched over, revealing that he wasn't the diminutive, harebrained scientist he often presented himself as. He towered over Gari, and was twice as wide. A non-shinobi might have thought he had a gut, but Gari knew that this is what great physical might truly looked like. I can't help you, he said simply. I know you can, Gari began, but the rest of his words were cut off. Of course I can, in the most literal sense, he replied, shoving a long list in front of Gari. But I have no time to add any more projects. You see this? These are all the things Lord Tsuchikage has asked me to complete. Oh, my mistake. I lied. This is just the third page. He sighed at Gari's stony countenance. I'm sorry about what has happened to your clan, and what has happened to the division you now head. The Explosion Corps is a unit that has been renowned throughout all of Iowa's history, as infamous as the Seven Swordsmen in Kiri and the Puppet Corps in Suna. I want to see its resurgence, I truly do. But Lord Tsuchikage's orders come first. Gari knew, but he didn't have to like it. If I can convince him to insert it somewhere in that list, would you help me? He asked instead. Of course I would. Then, he snorted. It would likely be a hell of a lot easier than the other tasks he's assigned me. I swear, all the other division heads bitch and whine about how good I've got it since the incident, but look at me. He gestured to himself and the room around him. Does it look like I'm having a party down here? Gari snorted. If you hung up the scrolls, you could use them as streamers. The man grimaced at the thought of his precious scrolls being used in such a way. So many Iowa shinobi had died to get them. Get a better idea of what you want. Make it as specific as you can. I'll give you an estimate of how long it will take. If it's short enough, it might help convince the Sandame. Thank you, friend, Gari said. I hope I can look forward to a close partnership in the future. A partnership works two ways, friend, was the retort. I may be sympathetic, but I do not run a charity. We're shinobi. You don't have to remind me. That said, Gari left the man to his own arcane devices. True to his words, he had some old favors to cash in. Kosaiki is back to having 0 friends. It's too bad we'll never see Iwao ever again in future chapters. I'm sure he'll have no relevance to the story moving forward. And I'm sure the Explosion Corps won't have any plot relevancy either. But pretty cool to see Gari alive, right? For those of you who don't recognize the name, he was Edo Tensei'd by Kabuto in the 4th Shinobi War alongside Pakura of the Scorch release, Haku and the Seven Swordsmen. Do you like my explanation of the clay explosion Kinjutsu? The incapacitation of the Bakahatsu clan's younger generation led to it being completely banned by the Tsuchikage, and it will remain banned until Deidara steals it. Hopefully, that explains why there aren't a million kamikaze pilots flying around on massive clay dragons. The loss of Iwao as a friend hit me harder than I expected. It didn't sit well with me that my mere existence caused the boy such stress, and it sat even worse with me that I couldn't do anything to fix it. The kid refused to see me, and I knew that going to his father was the last thing I should do. The only thing I could think of was to have Akane Obasan reach out to Yudai, which she claimed to have done before I approached her. She said, and I quote, "Best friends fighting broke her heart." I believed her when she said she spoke to the man, but nothing seemed to come out of it. I tried to keep a level head about the whole mess. Iwao was a kid, I couldn't blame him for acting so childish. I, of all people, knew what it was like to chase the approval of a distant father. However, in the end, my unwarranted frustration won out. The little shit could give me the silent treatment for as long as he wanted. He was kind of holding me back anyway. Was that an emotional response befitting of my mental age? No. Was it one that I would have in my old body? God, I hope not. The more time passed, the stronger the feeling I got that my mind was regressing to match my body. Or was I simply adapting to fit the mold of other people's expectations? Was this a real problem, or was it all in my head? I didn't know, and those questions kept me up at night. Unable to find any answers, I threw myself into training. Physical conditioning became one of my greatest priorities. I really didn't want to fail utterly in taijutsu, but that was starting to look unavoidable. I would already be a year behind my year mates in physical development, so I needed to find some way to compensate. My chibi-ness most definitely did not lend itself to the defensive nature of the stone fist. All my blocks would break upon even the slightest amount of pressure, and I could be forced out of strong stances way too easily. Until I grew up, it seemed hopeless. With my metaphorical back against the wall, I sought help from the only remaining resource I theoretically had available to me. Sensei, I broached hesitantly, approaching the woman the moment she appeared with her team. I'm not your sensei, she said flatly, eyeing my dripping form. Don't refer to me as such. Well, I don't know your name. I pointed out, the question implied. Then don't refer to me at all. Yikes. I almost turned and walked away, but I really needed guidance. I turn 4 in 6 months, I began. And the next academy semester begins with the new year. So I have approximately 7.5 months before I start at the academy. And my taijutsu is lacking. My body is too small to be compatible with the stone fist. Eyes flicked away from mine in disinterest. That's a shame. When there was clearly no follow-up incoming, I tried again. Is there any advice you can give me? A little peace, she allowed. Don't whine about your body being too small, or your muscles being too weak. If you're starting the academy early, you'll have to cope with those disadvantages. You won't be given exceptions, allowances, pity or mercy, especially when it was your own choice that put you in this situation. I meant about my taijutsu, I muttered, embarrassment burning in my core. Excuse the you, I did not whine. Iwagakure does not coddle her shinobi, she said. She knows that the best lessons are the ones a person teaches themselves. So what? I'm supposed to just let the older kids beat the shit out of me every time we spar? I asked incredulously. Exactly, she said in that same, infuriatingly bored tone. You let the older kids beat the shit out of you. Every time you spar. If you have potential, you'll grow stronger with each loss. I sighed. That didn't sound like a good time to me. But if that was the reality, I had better start getting used to it now. The last thing I wanted was to cry like a bitch in front of my classmates. I settled into a ready stance. I'm not going to fight you, kid, she said. You won't learn anything from fighting someone on my level, not unless I consciously edit my fighting style to allow you to learn from it. And I'm only paid to babysit 3 brats, not 4. What about them? I asked, gesturing to her team, each of them performing various exercises on the surface of the water. They have their own training to worry about, she said flatly. The faster they make chunin, the sooner I can wash my hands of them. I won't let you delay their training in any way. Aha, what if I'm part of the training? I said eagerly. And how could you possibly assist in their training? She prompted. The whole point of them practicing here is to get them used to fighting on water, I stated. So, sparring with me on the water would put their ability to the test. Sparring with each other or myself would be a much better exercise, she pointed out. And you don't know how to walk on water. I can learn, I protested. It's the last in a chain of progressively more difficult techniques, the Jonin stated. You will not be able to learn it in a year, much less 7 months. And even if you could, you don't have the chakra to maintain it for more than a couple minutes. You've underestimated my chakra capacity before, I pointed out. I did, she allowed. But only because I didn't care enough to look. If I put in even the slightest effort, as I am doing right now, I wouldn't have needed to estimate at all. That's right, was a censor. Wow, try to say that 3 times, fast. I had almost forgotten. Not. That little factoid was in the forefront of my mind whenever I was in her vicinity, because I did not want her to see all of the meddling I did with my internal chakra. Every week, prior to my regularly scheduled swim, I made sure that my canals were at low tide. That meant I wasn't actively stuffing them full of chakra by tricking my gate of view. It also meant that I ensured my overall chakra level resembled something normal. After getting a good night's sleep, my allotted once per week, that night, I would cycle to high tide over the course of the next several days. Of course, that bore significant risk. To lessen it, I began working on replicating the Iryo Ninpo, Shinden no Jutsu, medical ninja art, diagnostic technique. The name was pretty self-explanatory. It was what medics used to identify all manner of maladies that could be found in the human body. But, even though the hand seals were stated in my texts, learning the technique was far harder than I expected. Mainly because casting the jutsu and using it weren't necessarily the same thing. The concept was simple enough. First, the user transformed their chakra into something that could be accepted by the patient's body. This was what canon referred to as medical chakra, which felt weird. It was as if all personality had been stripped from my life force, turning it into something disturbingly flat and sterile. Like a hospital, I supposed. Once the chakra was made safe for the patient, the jutsu was released into their skin, where it phased through tissue and bone. Through their sustained control of the technique, medics could, for lack of a better word, feel the structure of the material that their chakra inhabited. I was very good at the jutsu. Since I was using it internally, there was no need for me to push the strange chakra through layers of skin and muscle. I could quickly move it through my canals, reaching just about any destination with ease before shoving it outwards through their walls. I'd imagine that working inside out was far easier than the alternative, as medics were forced to do with their patients. Not that my proficiency mattered, since I had no hope of interpreting the information it presented to me. The technique was only particularly useful in the hands of medics that had spent years using it on others, gaining exposure on what each type of injury felt like. Since I had nothing to compare my readings to, they meant almost nothing to me. I could have stage 3 cancer right now for all I knew. That wasn't to say the jutsu was entirely useless. I couldn't identify new injuries by comparing my physiology to anyone else's, but I could compare it to my own. I'd like to think that if I made a catastrophic mistake with my tides, I would at least be able to catch it during my daily examinations. Once I fully familiarized myself with my body's uninjured state, that is. I took a deep breath. You don't want to coddle me, and you don't want extra work. I get that. I don't want to be coddled. All I'm asking for is a sentence, a phrase, hell, even a word. Can't you please tell me something, anything, to point me in the right direction? She studied me for a moment, before her eyes slid off me once more. I just did. Now, get out of my way. Your voice is too shrill, and it's giving me a headache. I had no clue what meant. And I really wished I was paying better attention to the few sentences she spared me. But I just thought she was blowing me off, not giving me codes. Stupid. Kasaiki. Stupid. I'm training to be a ninja. A mysterious voice should be repeating the phrase "look underneath" in my brain at all times. The first thing I did when I got home was to grab a pen and a piece of paper and try to plot out the encounter to the best of my ability before I forgot even more. What happened first? I asked for her name, and she refused to give me it. I could find a lesson hidden in there pretty easily, but not one that had any relevance when it came to taijutsu. Next, I asked her for advice. She turned me down and told me not to whine about having a physical disadvantage. I remember that part pretty damn well. Though her exact wording escaped me, I was a bit distracted by my burning embarrassment. Then she gave a speech about Iwa not coddling her shinobi. Again, I didn't remember the exact wording. I think she said that the things I learn for myself are better, well, not better, more impactful maybe, than the lessons I learn from other people. There could be something in there. I said something about letting kids beat me up, and she agreed. Told me I should let that happen, seek it out even. Which was a weird thing for an adult to condone, but such was the world I lived in. After that, I got in my fighting stance. Not really because I wanted her to beat the shit out of me, but because I thought she might be impressed if she saw my resolve. She refused, saying that I wouldn't learn anything from fighting her. Because I'm stubborn and can't take no for an answer, I asked her if I could get one of her brats to beat me up. She also refused that request, and said that I couldn't practice with them because I couldn't water walk. I told her I could learn, and she said I couldn't. That it was too chakra intensive, and that there were a bunch of steps I needed to complete first. There might be something there, but I'll come back to that. She had also said something that referenced her sensing ability. If I was to take the just in the I just did most literally, that statement would have been the last thing she said. So was sensing the key. Chakra sensing is a whole thing, and not something I'm capable of. I think. I'm pretty sure it's not a skill that can be learned, but what if I'm wrong? Maybe she thinks I should pursue that, and try to read an opponent's moves with it. Kinda like the Naruto version of observational hockey. That would be pretty sick. After a couple days of research, i.e. asking Kazuhiro, finding out he knew nothing on the subject, and writing up a list of questions for him to ask his colleagues, I got the information I was looking for. With a heaping sigh of disappointment. First off, I was right. Chakra sensing was an innate trait, not a skill that could be learned. And even if I did possess the gift, it certainly could not be useful in a straight bout of taijutsu. Sensors each interpreted chakra presences in unique ways, but said ways were usually extremely abstract. They couldn't tell if someone was about to throw a punch or a kunai, and they certainly couldn't predict where. The closest thing I found was that powerful sensors could detect intense emotions within chakra. That might tip you off to an unexpected attack, but in a fair spar there was little utility. Defeated, I returned to my list. My eyes kept getting drawn back to a specific entry. The one where she explains why I can't water walk. It's the only point where she describes relatively specific information I could seek out myself. Luckily, due to my foreknowledge, I didn't have to go through all that trouble. The first step was the leaf sticking exercise. I think, and this might be fanon, that the goal was to be able to stick bunches of leaves to all different spots on my body and make them rotate, do a jig, or some stupid shit like that. The next step was tree walking, and then water walking was after that. Naruto was able to learn each of those last two things in a couple days, if that my memory was a bit hazy on the matter, and he was a certifiable dumbass. But said it would take a year to reach that point. The math doesn't track. Maybe it's a lot more difficult in real life than it was in the anime. Ni-san, I pestered Kazuhiro. Can we spar? My god brother looked at me strangely. You want to spar? Last time, you got really frustrated. Not my proudest moment, and hopefully more evidence that something sinisterly subtle was wrong with my mental state. Yeah, I admitted, but I won't be full grown for a long time, and I can't wait that long to get good at taijutsu. So even though it's really annoying, I have to practice. Kazuhiro smiled gently. That's a very mature way of looking at it, Kaseki-chan. He clapped his hands and stood up from his armchair. Why don't we both change, and meet out in the backyard? When we were both ready, I told him, don't hold back as much. I need to know exactly what weaknesses I have to overcome. I got some information from our last attempt before I called it off early, but I would like a more comprehensive and specific list. I even brought out some paper to write down my thoughts on. You call it when you're ready, Imouto, he said gently, standing tall and relaxed. I took a deep breath, sinking into the low, strong ready stance of the stone fist. All right, Hajime. Kazuhiro flashed towards me with a simple straight, clearly holding back a lot, but hopefully not as much as last time. I barely had time to throw up a textbook block before his fist made contact, bruising my little baby arms and knocking me backward. Despite my stance, I couldn't stay on my feet, though, counterintuitively, I stumbled forward before tripping. That was because, in order to keep myself from being knocked on my ass, I had to shift my weight forward to resist Kazuhiro's momentum. After I weathered the blow, my overcompensation cost me. Last time, Kazuhiro stopped after each hit, giving me time to collect myself before attacking once more. This time, he flowed into a spinning hook kick, which was also a lot slower than I knew him to be capable of. Thinking quickly, I rolled under the blow, though it still clipped my shoulder. The pain distracted me from rising as quickly as I needed to, and Kazuhiro pressed me gently into the ground with the same sandaled foot. Unlike shinobi of any other nature, those with earth affinities can sometimes find it advantageous to be knocked to the ground, Kazuhiro lectured as he allowed me to push myself up. But that's only after you learn some Doden ninjutsu. Until that happens, Being forced into that position is the last thing you should want during a spar. Yeah, I know, I sighed, rubbing my aching shoulder. I just don't know what to do to keep that from happening. You could practice dodging, he suggested. I would love to. But in the academy, I'll be graded on my ability to use the stone fist, I pointed out. Practitioners of the basic Iwa Taijutsu style could and should dodge in many circumstances. Simply allowing powerful hits to connect would be stupid. However, the offensive half of the stone fist, which was integral as it created openings for Iwa Nin to disengage, was almost entirely retaliatory. If I exclusively relied on dodging, I would never be able to get in a lick of my own. Let's go again, I said distractedly. He nodded, and as soon as I was in my ready stance, I shouted again, Hajime. Kazuhiro came fast once more, opting this time for a left cross. Using a different cross block, which supported my right arm with my left fist, I weathered the blow, even though the pain in my shoulder flared in protest. He must have hit softer, because I wasn't immediately thrown off my feet this time. Likely in response to my last comment, he was allowing me the opportunity to launch a counterattack. But the moment I tried, easing the support from my left arm in order to strike out with it, his fist slid past my guard and decked me in the sternum, knocking the wind out of me. Shit, I'm sorry, Kazuhiro yelped, rushing to where I had fallen, wheezing. I'm so sorry, Kasaiki-chan, are you okay? Yeah, I choked out. I'm fine, you didn't do anything wrong. It was my stupid, skinny forearms. My childlike arms were too slender, and though the block I attempted wasn't supposed to work like that, I had caught his punch with both my forearm and the opposite hand that had supported it. As I removed the hand, Kazuhiro's fist had rolled right off my remaining defense, and in the worst way possible. I don't know what to do, Ni-san, I bemoaned. I can't stay on my feet if I get hit. And even if I do manage to, I can't counterattack and maintain my block at the same time. I'm sorry, Imouto, he said regretfully. I don't know how to help you. Perhaps if you spoke to the academy sensei and explained the situation, they might make an exception. No, like said, I would be given no exceptions, allowances, pity or mercy. Not when it was my choice to enroll in the academy, early at that. And frankly, I didn't want any. Then, as I thought of the infuriating but gorgeous Jonan, her hint came back to me, and I grinned as the pieces clicked together. I know that look, Kazuhiro said with fond exasperation. You've thought of something ridiculous, haven't you? Yep, I chirped. Can we be done now? I have some more training to do. I thought I had good chakra control. Excellent chakra control, even, considering all I had done with my submarines and canal mapping. Apparently, I was completely mistaken. I had phenomenal chakra control, while it was inside of my body. But as soon as I let it out, all that control. Kaput. There are 3 facets of chakra control, Kazuhiro confided to me as I approached him, nearly in tears from frustration, after I had practiced for 3 whole days without seeing any results while up my tide system for a week in the process. 3 facets, I repeated. I had heard nothing of the sort in the anime. Yes, he confirmed. First, there is internal chakra control. Then there is chakra intensity awareness. And finally, external control. The first, as its name suggests, refers to one's ability to control their own internal chakra. It's only useful in very select circumstances. What the? The one thing I was exceptional at was only useful in very select circumstances. The statement pissed me off so much, I could barely comprehend what he said next. Then there's chakra intensity awareness, which is your sense of how much chakra you put into techniques. This is integral when it comes to ninjutsu, because all of them require specific amounts of chakra. Underpowering them will cause them to fail, and overpowering them will cause them to fail catastrophically. Usually, there is a certain threshold of tolerance, which varies from jutsu to jutsu, but you want to develop your intensity awareness to the point that you always stay on the low side. Adding more chakra won't improve a jutsu's effectiveness, it will just wear you out a lot faster, which can easily spell death. I took a deep breath to calm myself. And the last one, I assume that's what I'm struggling with now. Exactly, he confirmed. External control is crucial for the exercise you are working on, along with learning shape manipulation, which is a component of most jutsu C rank and above. My frown deepened. How do you mean? Think about the Kawarimi no Jutsu, he said. It is, by design, incredibly simple. The hand seals mold the technique, and all you have to do is aim and release it. For more advanced jutsu, you have to do a lot more. Take your father's Doro Nami o Sukamu no Jutsu, for example. The jutsu itself softens the ground and forms the wave, but I can manipulate its shape. Not much, but that's only due to my skill level. I am only capable of making the wave about 5 meters wide, but your father was capable of creating a full ring around himself. That takes a great deal of external control. What about jutsu with complex shapes, like the elemental dragon jutsu? I asked. I could only imagine the skill that it took to shape chakra in such a fashion. How do you know about those jutsu? Kazuhiro asked, confusion evident, and I winced internally. In my excitement, I forgot I wasn't supposed to know about that yet. Iwao told me about them, I claimed. It seemed likely to me that his father would at least tell him about some things, maybe he had even received a demonstration. And it wasn't like Kazuhiro could verify with the kid, since we weren't on speaking terms. He accepted the answer. Some jutsu have shape manipulation built into them, he explained. The ones you're referring to are like that. In fact, their shapes can't be modified further at all as a result. For that reason, such jutsu require many hand seals, and while they can be deadly, they are mostly just for show and intimidation. The second Hokage, Senju Tobirama, was said to have the strongest Suiton affinity in the history of the elemental nations. He was said to be able to perform the water dragon jutsu with a single hand seal. I had recently learned that, while some seals could be dropped with a great deal of practice, usually around a half to 2/3 of them were integral to the jutsu itself, though the number could be decreased further by merging seals into hybrids, something I still didn't know much about. So was Tobirama even using the water dragon jutsu? Or was it pure water shape manipulation? Either way, it was a massive flex. We were getting off topic. So my external chakra control is shit, I surmised. Language, Kaseki-chan, Kazuhiro chided, you can't swear much in the academy, people will think I'm a bad influence. I'm sorry, Ni-san. I'll try, I promised, knowing he blamed himself for my dirty mouth. There was a reason he wasn't surprised I learned those words, and I sure as shit didn't hear them from Akane Obasan. He wasn't used to having to censor himself either. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do except practice, he continued. Likely, your intensity awareness plays a role too. But once you have a better picture about how much chakra it takes to stick something to you, that will likely improve. A better picture of how much chakra. I slapped a palm to my forehead. Are you okay, Kaseki-chan? Kazuhiro asked, a smile tugging at the corner of his lip. Yes, Ni-san. Your Imouto is just a moron, is all, I told him. Now, I know for a fact that's not true, he said, patting me on the head like I was a dog. Don't miss dinner tonight, okay? I know how you get when you discover something. I laughed sheepishly before quickly retreating back to my room. I didn't have to estimate chakra output, and I didn't have to go by feeling either. I could measure my output in Hikari. Or, rather Sendi Hikari, as the needed output was so slight. After a great deal of trial and error, I came up with a quantifiable measurement, which was extremely helpful. But that was only a part of the equation, the rest of my difficulty came from the action itself. Simply, I had naturally shit external chakra control, and I needed to remedy that as soon as possible. Hell, even Naruto, the man, had better external chakra control than me, and oh boy was that realization depressing. I could think of no other reason he was able to learn tree and water walking in such a short period of time. He wasn't just better than me, he was great in general. It was his intensity awareness, and I assume his internal chakra control, that was epically shit, and that was what held him back when it came to finicky work, like leaf sticking and the Bunshin no Jutsu clone technique. For me, my chakra lost all cohesion as soon as it left my tenketsu. It took a phenomenal amount of effort to rein it in. And on top of that, chakra wasn't inherently sticky like some fics claimed, I had to actively manipulate it to grasp onto objects. But I needed to figure it out now. Even if I was barking up the wrong tree, and my taijutsu-related application didn't work in practice, this training wouldn't be a waste of time. It would still be incredibly helpful in the future. And some of my commenters stated that they really liked my speculations on chakra theory. Well, here you go. Basically an entire chapter on chakra speculation. I've always thought it was weird that most fanfic authors treated chakra control like some arbitrary score, even in non-gamer stories. That by raising your chakra control, you could just automatically do everything better. I think ninjas should still have to actively hone their chakra control for each new exercise they seek to accomplish. If you work out, but only do leg day for a month straight, is your upper body going to get stronger too? If you play the violin, can you suddenly learn to play the cello as well? Yes, some of the skills might translate, but they're completely different actions. Learning to tree walk by manipulating chakra through the tenketsu in your feet isn't going to magically grant you the ability to, for example, perform precise chakra exercises with the tenketsu in your hands. Those are my personal thoughts on the matter.